Right, Derek, here's a version of Mood Indigo by Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall I play it for you?
Yeah.
I tell you what, you listen and then play along a second time.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Yeah, listen carefully.
Plotseling dacht ik te begrijpen waarom ik heel het diverse gezelschap hier op het kasteel had uitgenodigd. Het gebeurde tijdens het gesprek met de 3 schrijvers, Brodsky, Vargas Llosa en Okri. In hun kinderjaren ervoeren zij de wereld der boeken en de reizen in hun verbeelding als meer reëel dan de werkelijkheid op straat. Boeken werden de eerste en enige werkelijkheid, terwijl de werkelijkheid zelf werd ervaren als onzinnig of lastig.
I would say this is what is typically literary, you know? This reconstruction of reality, the creation of alternative reality out not objective facts and events we witness or we were part of, but as something that we would have liked to be the real world, and it wasn't. And for that reason, we had to invent it, you know, with words and with fictitious recollections and memories, which in most cases are actually inventions and fantasies, you know.
Niets was me meer vertrouwd. Hoeveel avonturen herinner ik me die ik enkel leende uit boeken? Ja, waarom lijkt de verbeelding van de werkelijkheid van toen zoveel beter bewaard dan de werkelijkheid zelf? In hoeverre is de fantasie van toen inmiddels nog eens verder ingekleurd door latere ervaringen? Wat is er eigenlijk nog over van wat er echt gebeurde in onze kinderjaren en in al die jaren daarna?
My childhood seems to have disappeared into the books I read, and I suspect with each passing day that my childhood is to some degree quite fictitious. I'm not sure what is my childhood anymore, to be quite honest with you.
It's mixed up with...
It's mixed up with a lot of images, a lot of worlds, a lot of books, a lot of worlds, a lot of periods of time. I seem to have been in many different continents. I seem to have been in Egypt, in ancient Greece, in Persia, in Arcadia. It just seems to have disappeared, and 1 or 2 images maybe come back that seem to me to be real, but I may have invented that too.
Images from what you call the real world.
Real world, yeah. Mm-hmm. Was a particular day that it snowed, and I was crossing the field with my father in London. It had snowed very, very heavily, and we're crossing the field, and it was a very, very vast field. And I was very tiny, and my dad was a great giant. And as we were going across this, what seemed like a continent of whiteness, suddenly from out of nowhere, snowballs were being thrown at us. And my dad said, "Ignore it, the world does that to you sometimes." I didn't ignore it. I made my own snowballs and started throwing them back at people I couldn't see, at the earth, at the snow itself. And I got hit a lot. Eventually we got home, Dad went in, I went downstairs. And on that particular day, I remember it was the first day I kissed the girl that I've always wanted to kiss. Now, there's something about that. The kissing comes after the whole experience of being, as it were, rained on with packs of snow. So it also has something of the fairy tale about it. So even as I'm telling you this, I don't know if I experienced it. I don't know. I keep saying that I've lost my childhood. Books and other writers and other worlds and other imagination and words seem to have taken them away. I mean, talking about childhood is dangerous I don't want to speak for these two distinguished gentlemen, but for me it's one of the most dangerous areas to go fiddling around with, because it is the secret source of many things that you write about, and especially the ones that you're not even aware of how much it's a source.
There seems to be a structure, a sort of a skeleton that is accurate. That in fact I was at this place at this time, and I was in this building at this time, and that and this. But the conversations that I've got, the way a certain thing looked, the size of it, the color, the shape, the texture, oftentimes even what I really felt about it. If I go back and I dig up notes and things, those things seem to be severely distorted, seem to be twisted by something that happened from the time that I actually experienced it to the time I'm remembering it.
But how do you know what the truth was with which to compare your current belief?
It's usually most striking when you go back and visit people and you tell them, do you remember when I did this? And they were all there and they go, no, that didn't really happen. What really happened was this and this. And there's 3 or 4 observers there who can point it out to you. And sometimes it's particularly striking when you've left notes for yourself at a place.
But they might have said the same thing immediately afterwards, because we all perceive the world very differently. And it's hard to tease apart.
I see what you're saying. It may have been the initial coding of
that's
what
right,
happened,
yes.
as opposed to distortion of memory.
Yes.
Maar ja, wij zijn niet ontworpen ooit als getuigen. Wij zijn ontworpen als mensen die moeten overleven in een zich steeds veranderende wereld.
Waarbij hun geheugen voortdurend verandert.
Ja.
Ook hun herinnering aan dezelfde gebeurtenis verandert voortdurend.
Voortdurend veranderd, ja.
Merk je vaak dat het voor mensen een schokkende ervaring is om dat zich te realiseren? Of willen mensen het zich eigenlijk niet realiseren?
Het is heel erg vreemd eigenlijk dat we dit niet weten, want het gebeurt dus voortdurend. Waarom zou het een schok moeten zijn als we eigenlijk die ervaring hebben dat het steeds zo is? Dat is het merkwaardigste. Waarom weet niet iedereen dat? Dat je er voortdurend naast zit. Dat het altijd net iets anders is.
But I'm sure you're right that our memories, particularly about ourselves, are part of a complex but usually unified story that we tell about ourselves, which is broadly true and is very important for holding ourselves together as individuals, and probably the detail tends to get lost or incorporated in the story. So things that don't fit the plot line perhaps either stand out as being anomalous or are tidied up.
Well, Alan's emphasizing the good things. How about the empirical findings that we remember that we gave more to charity than we really did, or we took more airplane trips, or we had kids that walked and talked at an earlier age than they actually did, or some work that I and others have done. We voted in a recent election when we didn't really vote, as proven by the election records. So these are all ways in which we remember ourselves as better off than we were, a better person. That's the superiority complex of memory.
But that's part of the story. We like to be part of a good story, a success story, not a failure story. And maybe people who lose that capacity become depressed. And so it's perhaps a necessary distortion.
Dag Nelletje. Dag Nelletje.
Ja, je moet het zo doen. De ene doet het ja en de ander zegt, de andere zegt.
Wat wilt u zeggen?
Ja.
Wat wilt u zeggen?
Ja, zo. Het is alle boven.
Mevrouw Nobbe, houdt u van liedjes zingen? Houdt u daarvan?
Ja, zo is het. Met tegenwoordig gaat het over.
'Cause I was 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 ' Gaat het niet meer zo goed? Liedjes zingen.
Nee.
Oh Lord, can you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? All my friends drive Porsches, I must say amens. Worked hard for my family, no help from my friends. Oh Lord, can you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? Now, can you try it again? Play it on the piano?
Derek Paravaccini, de kleine, blinde pianist, zal zich over 30 jaar het liedje van Janis Joplin nog perfect herinneren. Maar niet dat hij het repeteerde op een kasteel in Nederland. Zoveel is nu al zeker. Misschien zullen alle andere gasten zich, als ze dan al niet gestorven zijn, de ontmoetingen nog wel voor de geest kunnen halen. Maar de vraag is, hoe?
Varje dag jag bodde Juan Vim
Gegeven het feit dat onze herinneringen voortdurend transformeren en veranderen, dient zich de vraag aan hoe we in godsnaam aan zoiets als de waarheid kunnen vasthouden. Schrijft de Amerikaanse geheugenpsychologe Elizabeth Loftus. Ik herinner me het verblijf op het kasteel als een van de hoogtepunten van het jaar, zal de schrijver Ben Okri melden, korte tijd na zijn verblijf hier. Dat is prachtig, schrijf ik terug, en nu maar bidden dat jouw herinneringen niet worden bedorven als je de filmmontage ervan terugziet. Want semper excelsior, zo gaan die dingen vaak. Alan Baddeley, de peetvader van het internationaal geheugenonderzoek, weet dat als de beste. Keer niet terug naar de bron van je prachtherinneringen, want je herinnering wordt meestal bedorven. Baddeley zal, enkele maanden na het rendezvous op het kasteel, schrijven dat het verblijf hier hem inmiddels voorkomt als een droom. Geen uitleg verder. Alleen een droom. Hoe zal Gary Lynch, de neurowetenschapper, zich zijn verblijf hier over 10 jaar herinneren? Lynch die droevenis voelt, zodra hij denkt aan de kleine Gary Lynch, die hij blijkbaar ooit was. Het ventje dat hem ontglipt is. Het ventje dat hem inmiddels vreemd is. Onze herinneringen zijn repetities van dezelfde muziekstukken, waarbij de compositie telkens wat verandert. Tot er tenslotte, zonder dat we het zelf nog in de gaten hebben, een totaal ander stuk wordt uitgevoerd dan het oorspronkelijke, schreef de bewustzijnspsycholoog Merlin Donald. Schreef hij dat? Ik probeer het citaat terug te vinden in zijn boeken. Het is onvindbaar. Zei hij het op het kasteel? Schreef Elizabeth Loftus het? Wat zullen ze zich later herinneren, al die gasten, van het kasteel nu? Vermoedelijk weinig, zegt de dichter Jozef Brodsky. Alleen herinneringen overleven die gekoppeld zijn aan gevaar en niemand hier vormt een bedreiging. De schrijver Ben Okri zou het niet verbazen als hij zich van heel het rendezvous over 10 jaar alleen zal herinneren hoe een koe hem aankeek in het weiland naast de kasteeltuin. Zijn collega, Mario Vargas Llosa uit Peru, valt hem bij. Dingen die buitengewoon belangrijk leken, zijn niet zelden spoorloos geraakt. Terwijl mijn geheugen triviale gebeurtenissen en beelden hardnekkig lijkt te bewaren. Zal Vargas Llosa zich over 20 jaar nog herinneren dat hij hier, op het kasteel, voor het eerst openlijk zou praten over zijn vader, de man die hij ooit doodwaande? Wat zal de schrijver en beeldend kunstenaar Armando zich over 10 jaar herinneren van zijn verblijf in de knechtenkamer? Mevrouw Nobbe lijkt zich nu al niets te herinneren, terwijl ze nog op het kasteel is. Lijkt, zeg ik. Beseft Richard Wavro waar hij is? Hij tekent maniacaal. We zullen veel later wel zien wat en waarom. Zal de schrijver Gerhard Durlachter zijn verblijf op het kasteel moeten bekopen met een zoveelste nacht waarin die vreemde nachtmerries zonder beelden opduiken? Moritz Kommer herinnert zich van het kasteel alleen de laatste 3 minuten dat hij er is. Telkens opnieuw, de laatste 3 minuten. Hij is al lang vergeten dat hij hier vanmorgen is aangekomen en waarom. Dat geldt niet voor de experimenteel psycholoog Willem Wagenaar en al evenmin voor de hoogleraar biochemie en voorzanger Hans Bloemendaal. En al helemaal geldt het niet voor Gabriel Minne, het obsessieve geheugenwonder uit België.
6 maart 1934.
Een dinsdag.
Klopt.
Hoe zeker kun je zijn van je herinneringen? Dat lijkt een welhaast onbeantwoordbare vraag. Tenzij, misschien, als je hem omdraait. Hoe moeilijk of eenvoudig is het om iemands herinneringen bewust te vervalsen? De baron komt na een ommetje langs de 500 jaar oude eik, vlakbij het kasteel, weer binnen. We kunnen voortgaan.
Danny, waar ben je?
Okay, can you try it on the piano?
How does it
If I do it once more?
Yeah.
Oh Lord, can you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? All my friends drive Porsches. I must say amens. Worked hard for my family. No help from my friends. Oh Lord, can you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? Wonderful. Derek, can you play it alone without me singing? Just repeat.
No.
You can't?
No?
Well, try it.
My interest has been in the distortion, the fragility, the malleability, the ease of contaminating memory. And it has sometimes been a hard thing to sell because I don't think people are very comfortable with the idea that their minds might be full of erroneous information, facts that aren't true, aspects of their past that really are out of touch with the real past. And yet, I think it's something we should accept and learn to live with. And it doesn't mean that there isn't, the good side of memory that somebody else can focus on.
One way of looking at it might be to say that there are aspects of memory that may be very stable, and that what is, I don't know whether I'm overinterpreting what you're saying, but what is likely to become distorted is your reconstruction or your active representation of your knowledge, but perhaps the basic experiences that set up your sense of self, your sense of place, your sense of time, your emotional base and so on, those are probably pretty stable, I would think. But it's your ability to represent those, especially in language, that may be most vulnerable to distortion. And it's interesting to speculate why that might be the case.
Well, Elizabeth wrote, the distortions of memory can be quite frightening, for they can cause us to have memories of things that never happened. And demonstrations tell us that false information can be introduced into a person's recollection. It can add to the memory or even transform the memory. Tell me, what kind of demonstrations do you have?
Over the course of the last 2 decades, I and my research assistants and colleagues have done literally hundreds of experiments involving maybe 20,000 individuals or more, in which we deliberately try to distort memory. We take somebody who has seen an accident in which a car goes through a yield sign, and we suggest to them that what they saw was a stop sign. And they will then later tell us they saw a stop sign. Or we convince people that they saw tape recorders or broken glass or barns that weren't there by suggestive questioning. But actually, my newest work, which is what I'm really incredibly excited about right now, since for years, I and many other people around the world have shown that you can distort memory for events that actually did happen, and even events that were traumatic at the time. Now we're asking, could you implant an entire memory into someone's mind for something that didn't happen, but had it happened, it would have been at least mildly traumatic. And so we are taking individuals, they're adults, and making them believe through the power of suggestion that at the age of 5, they were lost in a shopping mall, they were lost for an extended period of time, they were frightened, they were crying, and then they were rescued by an elderly person and reunited with their family. So it was interesting to hear the distinction you were making between autobiographical and episodic memory, which have been sort of lumped together. In this study, we're really giving people a new piece of autobiography. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty incredible.
What happens?
Well, you get people to start to report back this. See, we bring in a trusted family member. We bring in the older sibling or a parent of this subject to help us with the seeds to plant the memory.
That's incredible.
So now you let this simmer for a while and bring the person back a couple weeks later, and they start saying, yes, I remember it, and they tell us about their feelings. They tell us I was scared. They'll put in conversation. I was afraid I'd never see my family again. They can describe sometimes the person who rescued them. And so is this a real memory? Is this as real to them as some of their actual genuine autobiographical memories?
It seems to be.
Well, we think so. I mean, if elaborating on the detail beyond the seeds used to implant the memory is any indication, they do that. They tell us more than we suggested. If describing emotion is any measure, they do that. If when we're debriefing them, we say, one of these memories that we've been talking about didn't really happen. We made it up, and there actually were some true ones and then this false one. Can you tell us which one? If they pick one of the true ones, I mean, that's another sign. So I believe...
So you mean, just so I understand,
Okay.
experiment, because So you have family members come in and they talk about things that happened to this person.
Yes.
And you plant some, and some of these things really did happen.
Right. So technically, the family member gives us 3 true memories, and then the ingredients for the false one. And then we go to the subject, usually with a booklet that says, you know, we're going to talk to you about some childhood memories, and on each page is a different memory that we learned about from your mother, your father, your older brother. And so they read about, oh, remember the time you were 5 and it was Christmas and you got a fire engine, you know, for a toy? Tell us what you remember. And they write about this, and then they turn the page. Remember the time you were lost in the University City shopping mall, and you were about 5, and older brother and mom was with you, and all of a sudden you were gone for the longest time, and an elderly person rescued you? Tell us what you can remember about that. And so they write about this false memory along with the true ones. That's the process of implantation. And I believe that what we've captured here is the suggestive ingredients for leading people to construct something that didn't happen to them.
Mensen ervaren hun geheugen, als we het zo mogen noemen, als één ding. Als een continu verhaal, als iets wat continu aanwezig is.
Ja. In feite is dat veel brokkeliger dan we denken. En is het idee dat het om een samenhangend, continu geheel gaat, is een soort illusie, een saus die er overheen wordt gegooid en die praktisch is. Omdat het prettig is om te geloven dat alles met elkaar samenhangt en begrijpelijk en inzichtelijk is. Maar in feite berust het op niets. Je zou het kunnen vergelijken met het idee dat als je in een kamer zit, dat je het gevoel hebt dat je de hele kamer ziet. Dat je een complete kamer om je heen ziet. Terwijl in feite, als je realiseert wat je eigenlijk scherp ziet en wat je in die kamer helemaal niet ziet. Als je dat realiseert, begrijp je dat je intern een beeld van een complete kamer opbouwt. Die is opgebouwd door successief dat allemaal te scannen. En dat de illusie van de complete kamer die je eigenlijk voortdurend ziet, dat je je complete omgeving voortdurend ziet, ja, een illusie is een praktische saus die gegooid wordt over zaken die eigenlijk broksgewijs zijn opgebouwd.
Maar het gekke is, ik weet niet wat dat met mijn geheugen is. Ik zie, als ik daaraan terugdenk, precies die kamer voor me. Precies waar alles hing. Zelfs een aantal van de etsen. Weet ik nog precies waar die hingen en hoe ze eruit zagen. En het eigenaardige is dat het een soort kleurenfoto bijna is. Hè? Ik weet nog, die bank was rood. Ik kan dat kleed nog beschrijven. Maar dat is dus een hele kleine flits, een periode. Wat daarna gebeurde en zo, dat weet ik niet. Het zijn, wat ik aan het begin al zei, het zijn telkens kleine portretten.
Nou, met de herinnering aan ons leven, aan gisteren, eergisteren, ons totale leven, is het eigenlijk hetzelfde. Het gaat om brokstukken die min of meer onverbonden zijn, maar waar die illusie overheen gegooid is van een continu geheel.
Ja, een soort verstilde tijd.
Ja,
versteden
wel bewogen. Ik zie wel een zekere beweging in, maar het is een stukje uit de film geknipt. De rest van de film ken ik dus niet, hè? Maar gewoon een paar beeldjes uit die film.
If you ask your students, were you ever lost as a child, how many of them will say yes?
Well, we've asked a separate group of people, yes. If they've ever been lost, and it's a common experience, at least to be lost momentarily,
yes.
or to report
For
that.
the four of you, or have you been lost in a shopping center somewhere or a department store?
I don't know. I can't think of a specific occasion, but I must have been lost sometime.
Oh yes,
But that's why Alan's point about is this the only one you've done? Can we also see something else be implanted? Because it's a natural response.
I certainly remember being lost, and I remember losing children as well.
I can only remember being lost in the forest, not the shopping center, but in the forest.
Yes.
But I get you to remember this place, that age, these people. This happened.
Right,
So-
but typically the amount of detail that one has from there is very vague. So I think it was in an arcade.
The filling in process is not so
I don't know
difficult.
very much else about it. And if you were to tell me, no, it wasn't an arcade, it was actually in a market, then I'm not so sure that if my mother had said, no, it's definitely in this corner of the market, that I would think, well, okay, that bit of the market is a little bit like an arcade, and okay, maybe that's right. Now let's see what would be the implications of that. Well, I suppose that shop would be this particular one, and you can then start to build a story based in great measure on truth, or at least real memories.
I remember times when I was lost.
I remember the family also, of course. As
Times when you were lost, I'm sorry, but lost where?
Oh, just lost in London.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't playing with friends. They went their different ways. You got completely lost. You didn't know where you were, and you needed money or needed to get back, and everybody else ignored you, and someone took the trouble to just, put you on a bus and send you back home.
Some of it always reminds you of this business that Mike Gazzaniga and the others have with the split brain patients, where they get the patient to draw something with one side of the brain, and then they expose the patient to the object that they've just drawn. They say, oh, look, you've just drawn a carrot and a screw. And then the subjects ask, well, why did you do that? And the subject goes, oh, well, just the other day I was thinking about how carrots can be screwed into salads in a very strange way. It's a poetic metaphor. Now, obviously, the person one side of the brain had a very good reason for doing it because they'd been shown these two things and told to draw it. But the other brain, having seen the results of this operation, immediately comes up and provides a story to explain the whole thing. It seems to be an incredibly powerful, Gazzaniga's point of that experiment is to say that it is an incredibly powerful feature of the human brain, the human machinery, to take things and to make sure they all fit together. It's as though, if I've got these pieces implanted in there, I must make them fit together as soon as you ask me. So perhaps the problem of implanting memories is not quite as hard as it might seem.
Moritz, we zitten hier in een kasteel om te praten over het geheugen.
Ja.
Voor televisiefilms, dat weet je nog?
Nee.
Een paar televisiefilms voor de VPRO-televisie over geheugen en herinnering.
Oh ja.
Ja? Wat denk je als ik zeg korenveld?
Korenveld? Oh, een groot terrein met allemaal koren, aren, zo erop.
Geen speciale herinneringen aan?
Nee.
Dat je midden in het korenveld lag bijvoorbeeld? Zo.
Nee.
Ja?
Want in Indonesië had je geen korenvelden. Nee. Dus, ik heb nog nooit een korenveld gezien trouwens. Nooit.
Waar? In Indonesië?
Nee, ja, ook hier in Nederland nooit. Korenveld.
Heb je nooit gezien?
Nee.
Kun je niet herinneren?
Nee, ik kan het me niet herinneren.
Nee.
Dat ik het ooit gezien heb. Misschien heb ik het wel eens een keer gezien, maar...
Je had het net al over de
rijstvelden, weet ik wel. Ja. Ja, dat is een prachtig gezicht, rijstvelden.
Want?
Al die aren met die rijst eraan, weet je. Die goudkleurige, zo lang zijn het. En dan moet je dan zo met je vingers... En dan kun je, vallen de aren vallen eruit, hè.
Ja. But how difficult is it for you, for instance, to convince Gary that he was sexually abused in his early childhood? Because we're talking now about getting lost in a department store. But if we're talking about filling in process of traumatic events, how difficult is it? Or how easy?
I don't know enough about Gary or his past or whatever, but I do believe that a similar mechanism to the one that I'm using or investigating with these false memories of being lost or false memories of going into the hospital, whatever, might be similar to the mechanism involved when people come to believe that they were sexually molested when they weren't. And maybe the degree of suggestion is much greater. The kinds of cases that I see are ones where the person goes into therapy, so already they're depressed or they have low self-esteem or they're not getting along in their marriage, and the therapist might actually say, you know, everyone I've seen with those symptoms was sexually abused. Do you have anything like that in your history? Then dreams get into the picture because maybe the person uncomfortable with this question starts to dream about a person hovering over them, or even just dream about a serpent or something that gets interpreted as indicative of sexual abuse. Then maybe they try hypnosis and try to visualize who might have abused you, even if you can't remember. So there you have this same visualization idea that I think we're using in our Lost in a Shopping Mall study. And out of this arsenal of suggestive techniques comes a person who now starts to remember a stream of traumas that they claim they were totally unaware of. And I think it's reasonable to ask whether or not this isn't a false memory. In most cases, you can't tell. There's no corroboration one way or another. But in some cases, there is the corroboration to know that it's false. And so.
De psychotherapeut praat mij aan dat ik waarschijnlijk een incestueuze verhouding met mijn moeder heb gehad. Is het vrij makkelijk om mensen daar dan, als je dat maar een paar sessies voor neemt, van te overtuigen?
Niet iedereen, maar voldoende mensen om de samenleving duurzaam te ontwrichten. Ja. Een voldoende aantal mensen is daarvan te overtuigen, die dus redelijk snel zelf met verhalen komen, waarvan ze soms nog wel zeggen, ik kon me dat zelf niet herinneren, maar de psychiater heeft me geholpen te herinneren en nu weet ik het. Maar heel vaak zelfs dat aspect alweer vergeten. En komen met zulke verhalen alsof ze dat dus helemaal spontaan zelf herinnerd hebben. En die gevallen, daar komen er steeds meer van, worden steeds beter gedocumenteerd. We noemen dat repressed memory en psychiaters noemen dat repressed memory treatment. Dus de behandeling van verdrongen herinneringen die door de psychiater opnieuw ingesproken moeten worden op de band om herinnerd te kunnen worden. Dat neemt een behoorlijk hoge vlucht. En inderdaad, verontrustend voor de samenleving.
Want?
Want we worden geconfronteerd met verklaringen van mensen die ze dus niet spontaan gemaakt hebben, maar die volslagen zijn ingeprent door anderen die daarvan in principe helemaal niks af kunnen weten, want die waren daar niet bij.
It was peculiar. I actually was asked to be on a jury.
Really?
California, and they call you in, and it's your duty, and you go in, and the judge. So you've influenced me indirectly, and the judge asked the question. Now this trial involves this and this and this, and the question of recollection came up. And so, is there anything that you've heard that would influence your opinion on this jury? Then I for that, to be honest, started saying, well, I have this memory thing and people repeating what they've seen and things. This would concern me. So
they said, "Thank you very much. We won't be needing you."
We won't be needing that sort of thing here. That's right. I said, I make no claim to being expert on these things, but it would concern me. Goodbye, and get us another juror. That's extraordinary, though.
En ook in Nederland hebben we deskundigen die zeggen, ik kan aan het gedrag van een persoon zien wat hij meegemaakt heeft. Die persoon weet dat zelf niet, dus vertel ik ze wat ze meegemaakt hebben, dan weten ze het en kunnen ze daarover verklaringen afleggen. En hoe die deskundigen dat aan het gedrag kunnen zien, dat is dan een beetje een raadsel natuurlijk. Want daar zijn zeker geen wetenschappelijke methoden voor.
Maar dat prachtige geheugen van ons, dat is zo dresseerbaar en vervormbaar als de pest.
Op sommige punten, soms zeer belangrijke punten, en van sommige mensen. Maar van iedereen tot op zekere hoogte.
I used to think that you'd look at the rewards out there and maybe the memory would shift in the direction of getting those rewards. So if you want to think of yourself as being more generous or more important or whatever, that your memory might shift, or you might adopt new elements that would allow you to have that kind of prestige-enhancing memory. Until I recently started seeing these memories of being a victim. And so what would be the motivation that people would have to want to believe that they had a more miserable childhood, a more frightening existence, a more violent and inappropriate growing up?
If it gives you a better story, if it allows you to say, aha, that's why I feel miserable now.
Right.
And coming to terms with that, if they're promised, you'll get rid of your problems, you won't feel unhappy.
Right.
And that's a pretty pretty
good
good motivation.
Yeah, so there's a motivation for what you might think of as why would anyone ever want that for a memory? But if you can feel better about yourself, or if you can have the promise that this is going to get you better, or you can get all the comfort and support from your fellow group members for this.
That has a long tradition in fundamentalism, doesn't it? That idea of group confession, of coming up with confessions, very emotional memories, and then getting group consolation and so on. Maybe the current spate of such events in society just reflects that same tendency to want to, as it were, capitalize on the emotional sympathy of other people. But there's also the possibility of monetary rewards given the legal situation today, and also vengeance and other less...
Most of the cases that I've seen, I think, I and others would agree, these people really have adopted these beliefs, and their therapists have helped them to do that. And it's not a matter of greed. It's not for revenge, and in a way, that's why it's sort of scarier. Fraud is easy, but the self-deception is.
Bertrand Russell has quite a nice essay on the superior virtue of being oppressed.
Oh, really?
And it allows a certain self-righteousness if you were oppressed somehow. And there is, I think, an aspect of human nature that's a bit like that it means someone else was wrong, and therefore, by contrast, even though you've not done anything other than suffered that oppression, you are more worthy than they are. And I suspect there's an element of that too.
No, at least the two of you have one writer in common. Do you know who?
Who? Well, Joseph Roth, without any doubt.
Joseph Roth, yeah. We do. We both admire that author. And however, speaking of Roth, his childhood and his literature, this is perhaps the worst possible beginning, because Roth was, how should we put it, a tremendous inventor, or a liar, to put it very...
well, as all novelists are, that's the right.
Yeah, well, and there were some... he presumably had some reasons for being somewhat apprehensive about his actual origins. So he came up with all sorts of stories about his ancestry, etc., etc. And he would give you on different day different version of his own childhood. So much for memory. Well, presumably, he was born in the provinces of the Habsburg Empire. Presumably, he was of Jewish origin. Presumably, he didn't feel that he fits very well into the general order. Well, and he was trying to create a situation or create an impression of himself as being on par with the upper class, as it were, or his version of the upper class. And so hence all those versions of his personal record. Well,
what I think is fascinating with Joseph Roth is that when he was born and when he started his career, everything seemed so solid for him. He became very young, a very prestigious journalist. He was accepted as a brilliant young intellectual, and suddenly everything started to collapse around him. He discovered one day that actually he was not well accepted at all, that he was becoming a marginal, in a society where to be a Jew was becoming more and more a threat. And then his country also disappeared, and collapsed, and everything that was so stable around him simply disappeared, And, what I like very much in his work is that this world, which in real history didn't exist anymore, was rebuilt out of recollections, out of desperation of someone who had lost everything and had to invent himself, a background and a history, and probably what Joseph Roth did is what writers do, maybe with less historical significance, because in his case, his tragedy was the tragedy of a whole society, of a whole continent. But probably writers are trying to rebuild or to resuscitate something that they have lost, and that this is a very strong encouragement for writing and for inventing. In this sense, I think memory is really the raw material out of which fictions and poetry and plays are built.
You can trick a baby to think that it has a memory that it doesn't have.
Yeah, basically, that's what she's shown.
I was wondering about you. I was wondering about you tricking college
rules.
Oh, you mean the ethics of this?
Tricking little babies. I mean, my God, where will
Well,
this stop?
it's memory.
Just interesting how they did it.
How did
No
you,
ethics.
you will tell me to do that. How do you do that?
It had, it's something about how you learn that your foot is attached to a mobile. You know this stuff, Alan? Help me out here.
I know the general paradigm, but I'm not sure that I know the bit where you.
She publishes in Memory and Cognition, and she's got these infants. Their foot is attached to a mobile, and they learn that every time they move their foot, they can make the mobile move, and then she substitutes a new mobile for this one, and pretty soon they lose their memory of some details of one of the earlier mobiles. I mean.
Yes, you can certainly show interference effects, which are so. If you learn, basically, you teach them that when they kick, the mobile moves, and then you untie the ribbon and you can extinguish it. And you can also demonstrate that if you put a new mobile in that's very different, then the child won't kick.
But isn't that like reversal learning or something? I don't see that as particularly.
Well, she is actually talking about this in the misinformation paradigm. I mean, the feeding of misinformation to these infants to get them confused about what they're supposed to be doing or something like that.
Yes, I
it sounds to me a bit more like discrimination, reversal learning in animals. I don't see it as involving representational systems.
I think I'm not explaining it right, but that's maybe my fault. So.
Well, but what about the general point that maybe what...
I think we could do it to animals. I mean, if you teach me how to talk to them, how to speak their language not using words, then I'll help you figure out how to mislead them.
Mislead them, I see. Well, that's almost the question, I suppose. But is it possible to do it without language? I mean, going back to what Merlin was talking about? Is it possible that the misinformation, the implanted memory thing, requires the use of language because it comes out of the loop between mind, society, and the mind?
No, here's a way you could do it without language, I think. First of all, I used language because I'm trying to simulate this situation where you see an accident and then somebody interrogates you about it and they ask leading questions or they tell you what another witness said, that kind of situation. So there is a verbal input that distorts your visual memory. But you could do it without language. You could do it without language by inserting erroneous details into a visual scene or something like that.
Yes, you could do a recognition test where you're ostensibly testing some other aspect of the scene, but where you subtly insert this false information.
Yeah,
so
exactly
that they've
like
seen
that.
the false information lots of times while they're being asked about something else, and then you ask them about that feature of the
Could try that. Could try that. Could try that.
To their own
See if they still peck or chirp or...
But the thing is,
nose poke.
The false information is to them not false.
That's
it's
right.
Genuine information.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that it's the same thing.
Hoe vaak gebeurde dat gisteren auto-ongeluk? Vandaag interviewen we 5 getuigen. Dat we 5 verschillende verklaringen krijgen. Doordat je aan die 5 getuigen op een andere manier vragen stelt. Hoe ver kun je daarmee komen in het manipuleren van iemands geheugen?
Ja. Daar kan je dus heel ver mee komen. Omdat een vraag eigenlijk altijd nieuwe informatie inhoudt. En dus door het stellen van de vraag je conflicterende informatie geeft die op dat moment nog even het geheugen verandert. Bijvoorbeeld als je vraagt, hoorde u het brekende glas? Dan geef je informatie dat het brekend glas was. En dat is een totaal andere vraag als, hebt u het breken van glas gehoord?
En als je zegt, hoorde u het brekende glas, dan heeft ook iedereen automatisch dat glas horen breken.
Dan krijg je dus veel meer rapporten over brekend glas. En dat is ook onmogelijk terug te draaien, want dat brekende glas is op dat moment een onderdeel gaan vormen van de herinnering. En het feit dat dat er pas later aan toegevoegd is in die herinnering niet meer te herkennen. Hangen geen naamkaartjes aan van direct toegevoegd, dag later toegevoegd, jaar later toegevoegd.
In principe kun je dus suggestiebele vragen te stellen over bijvoorbeeld een auto-ongeluk wat je op een film laat zien.
Ja.
Uit welke Amerikaanse staat kwam die Chevrolet, terwijl het duidelijk om een Duitse auto gaat. Een totaal andere versie van die gebeurtenis in iemands geheugen krijgen.
Ja. En irreversibel, dus niet meer terug te draaien.
Je schreef, ik heb alle gelegenheid het portret van mijn grootvader, die ik nauwelijks heb gekend, maar wiens liedjes in een vreemde, zachte taal, wiens grapjes en wiens gouden tinkelende horloge nog wazig en warm in mijn herinnering voortleven, intens te bestuderen.
Ik was toen heel klein toen ik hem ontmoette. Ik heb hem na dat derde of vierde jaar nooit meer ontmoet. Maar ik zag dus zijn grote ovale portret en dat van mijn grootmoeder achter het bed van mijn ouders hangen. En dat horloge, dat was op dat portret. Of ik dat ooit zelf in handen gehad heb, dat weet ik niet. Maar ja, ik herinner me gezicht. En hij was Roemeen van huis uit. Hij kende gekke liedjes. En die zwerven soms nog even door mijn hoofd. Maar niet de melodie echt. Ik weet alleen dat ze heel zacht klonken.
Je weet niet meer waar ze over gingen?
Nee, absoluut niet.
Ik vraag het ook daarom dat je kijkt naar het gezicht van je opa bijvoorbeeld. Ja. Daar boven je bed. En je fantaseert als kind natuurlijk veel over die opa die je nauwelijks gekend hebt.
Het is best mogelijk dat het projectie was, hoor.
Dat die man helemaal niet zo was, maar dat het verhaal is wat jij van hem gemaakt hebt doordat je al die keer als kind denkt.
Dat is best mogelijk. Maar dat weet je niet. Ik kan in dat opzicht waarheid en leugen niet van elkaar scheiden. Want het geheugen speelt een hele rare rol dan, hè?
Ja, dus die horlogeketting, dat zal wel kloppen. Maar dat hij zacht zong en een vriendelijke man. En...
Het is heel goed mogelijk dat ik dat erin geprojecteerd heb.
Well, we started with Lost in a Shopping Mall.
Yeah.
We wanted something that, in trying to think of what could we implant that would show that you could create an entire memory for something that didn't happen, would have been mildly traumatic, that we could get through the Human Subjects Committee.
Right.
So, you know, that's a walking a fine line there. And so we came up with this Lost in a Shopping Mall. I also wanted to think about implanting a positive memory. But you have other ethical concerns when you try to think about implanting a positive memory. So one idea I got during lunch one day was, well, what if I tried to implant a memory of when you were 5, you were sitting on your grandmother's knee and your grandmother told you that you were always her favorite. I thought, oh, isn't that a warm, fuzzy, wonderful memory? But then go to the end of the experiment where you have to debrief the subject and tell the subject, no, we made that up. And so it's tricky.
Ik weet nog heel goed, ik had toen een hele redelijke stem. Toen ik jaar of 5 was. En ik moest zelfs nog een Hollands liedje leren om mijn opa te plezieren. En toen zat ik op de buik van mijn tante. En die zegt, nou moet je gaan zingen. De gebeurtenis zie ik nog zo.
Het liedje, weet u nog welk het was?
Dat was een dankgebed wat wij altijd zingen na het eten. Zeker.
Hoe gaat het?
Och, dat ga ik toch niet zonder begeleiding zingen. Geloof me, ik weet de melodie nog.
Ja.
But since we first reported the initial cases of false memory of the shopping mall, Ira Hyman at Western Washington University implanted in adults a memory for having to go to a hospital overnight for a suspected ear infection at about the age of 5. Steve Ceci at Cornell implanted getting caught in a mousetrap and having to go to the hospital to get the mousetrap removed in preschool children. So we're just beginning to see a new paradigm here.
This is scary stuff in a sense, isn't it? I mean, not for your experiments, but so in a social sense. I mean, you can imagine going out and saying, we've always believed as we have always believed. I mean, this is, I don't want to get off the subject, but
this is on the subject. It is scary.
It does bring in the notion of why it is that charismatic leaders sometimes perhaps might want to stand up and start saying, sorry.
This is what national history is. Essentially implantation of false memories.
Right. I believe that, for example, in China, how did the Chinese government convince all those citizens at Tiananmen Square that it was, the soldiers who were the innocent people and it was the students who were the aggressors? Through some of these same kind of high-tech psychological techniques of implantation.
Herinneringen veranderen in de loop van ons leven. Als ik denk dat ik me schitterende, hete zomers en koude winters herinner in mijn jeugd. Als ik denk dat ik mijn moeder zie staan in de deuropening en de zon valt erop en ze keek aardig. Dan is dat het beeld wat de tijd ervan heeft gemaakt. Maar het is niet meer wat er werkelijk gebeurde toen.
Ja, maar als ik dat trieste beeld bekijk, toen België met 9-1 verloor van Nederland, dan was het werkelijk 9-1. Hè? En als ik het beeld van 1963 bekijk, ik was een grote supporter van Rick van Looy. En rond zijn wereldkampioenschap, dan wordt hij door een andere Belg, ben je nog niet beheid, voorbijgesneld de laatste 10 centimeter. Maar dat was het beeld. Hè? En als je nu dat beeld ziet, dan zie je dat beeld, omdat het werkelijk zo was. Mensen die de oorlog hebben meegemaakt, ja, als ze die beelden, als ze zien bijvoorbeeld, ik heb mijn schoonvader dikwijls horen vertellen van een familielid die meegenomen werd door de Duitsers. Maar ze hebben hem meegenomen hoor. Het is niet de tijd die dat gemaakt heeft. Ze hebben hem werkelijk meegedaan. Ja.
It is kind of frightening when I think about what people who don't have the best of motives can do to other people with these skills, with these procedures, with this way of suggesting a new past to people. That's potentially somewhat frightening. And sometimes I'll be giving a talk about my work and I'll actually have people say to me either out loud or privately afterwards, don't you think it's dangerous for you to be talking about all these experiments on memory distortion and memory malleability, because others will pick this up, politicians, lawyers, I'm not sure who they're afraid of, government officials, and use this knowledge for devious means. And of course, that raises the question of the use of any scientific knowledge.
I suppose I've always assumed that it would be possible from the brainwashing literature, that at least to some extent, if you work hard enough and you choose your memory correctly and you choose your person correctly, then probably you can. And I think that's depressing, but not necessarily frightening. And provided, the important thing is to try to ensure that you have a system that doesn't do this. But I think we have to accept that probably a ruthless enough dictatorship that wants to spend a lot of time and select suitably vulnerable people can certainly do this, and that at a milder level probably all the time, where to some extent having our memories adjusted and massaged and so forth. And
you're sophisticated about this, and even short of the government, what about the fact that false memories are being created unwittingly? And yet, in some arenas, if somebody comes up with a memory, particularly if it's a trauma memory, other people believe it. And there's this kind of uncritical acceptance of these memories, especially if they involve something sexual, without any stepping back and saying, hey, is there another explanation for this?
Yes, I think that is highly alarming.
Als ik nu een beeld zie als kind, toen ik 12 jaar was, en dus ik denk dat in Nederland ook, maar dat noemde de plechtige communie. Als ik me nu zie naar die kerk gaan, met mijn moeder, met die zon erop, dat was het omdat de zon was, hè.
Waarschijnlijk regent het, zegt Loftus dan.
Ja, maar dat is niet waar. Hè. Dat is niet waar. Ze mag altijd de proef doen. Als ik zeg dat die dag regende, maar dan regent het.
Maar als de zon scheen, dan scheen die.
Dan scheen de zon. Dat ben ik zeker.
But this idea that our memories are continually being transformed and altered and
No, I think it's
distorted.
I think it's for the birds. It happens to everything, not only to the memories, but even to the perception of reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. In fact, you may read the newspaper, an article with the fresh news, and you read an entirely different story in it. Yeah.
I remember a very good story, I think, by Graham Greene, a couple who had written. They thought they had designed a heart with their names in a tree. Mm-hmm. The first time that they had love together. Mm-hmm. And many years later, they return in a ritual, peregrination, a ritual journey to this tree. And they discover that in fact, pilgrimage, sorry. Mm-hmm. They discovered that, in fact, in this heart, well, they hadn't drawn a heart, but their sexes, a very dirty kind of design, and they are really shocked because their memory had absolutely glamorized the real thing.
No, there is a standard expression, my memory plays tricks with me.
Well, I think sometimes the memory is the body being creative, improving things, blurring things. Especially improving our past conduct.
Yeah, so if the scientists here, the cast say, at the moment you invite the writers and they're coming here and you say falsification and memory are one and the same thing, they will totally agree. We are studying the same subject, they know.
So that is the reason why I think we must not forget imagination when we talk about memory. Imagination is there, it's very near, and sometimes interfering,
Sometimes.
I wouldn't use the word falsification equals memory. I think that's a bit too harsh.
Mm-hmm. Kind of continual reinterpretation, or depending on your own
enriching,
enriching,
enriching the past,
enriching, dropping certain elements, making others more bearable and more pleasant, absolving certain aspects. Falsification really makes it seem like we're carrying around this rather vicious liar inside of us. Mm-hmm. It's not really necessarily a total liar, it's just...
Novelists have been telling us for years anyway. People have always been asking writers for years and saying, well, did any of this really happen in your book? And the writers have been saying, what difference does it make?
Including Marcel Proust, by the way.
And the writers are like, what difference does it make? And I guess they were saying something more subtle than they would have ever guessed. In a sense, not only does it not make any difference about what I'm writing being the truth, it's what's in your head might not be all that different than what I've written.
I'm not sure that it's only novelists either. I can remember a sort of folk term for someone who used to tell slightly tall stories that, in Yorkshire at least, they'd say, oh, he's a bit of a romancer.
Romancer.
And it was accepted that what he said, or she said, made a good story, but you didn't necessarily believe it. And so, I suspect that people have had this realization that what gets told and remembered may not be all that accurate anyhow. And certainly what's written in the newspapers, obviously not. And so I suspect maybe people have been more sophisticated than we're giving them credit for.
Ik praat je nog even bij. Je weet wie ik ben en waarom je hier zit?
Nee, ik weet niet hoe u heet.
Wim Kayzer.
Wim Kayzer, oh.
Ja. We zijn hier aan het filmen dus voor een programma over geheugen en herinnering.
Ja.
En daarom praat ik met je, want we hebben elkaar eerder getutoieerd, dus daarom zeg ik je. Ja. Heb je al eerder ontmoeten. Over geheugen en herinnering en je geheugenverlies. Ja. Daar wil ik het ook even over hebben. Je bent dus in Nederland. Plotseling gebeurt er iets. Dus een dag waarop je ziek wordt.
Ja.
En dat je geheugenverlies begint. Kun je je daar zelf nog iets van herinneren?
Nee, helemaal niet. Is dat in Nederland gebeurd, dat geheugenverlies pas? Oh.
13 jaar geleden, 14 jaar geleden.
Oh. Ik dacht dat ik al veel eerder, toen ik 14 was, toen kreeg ik wel geheugenverlies. Nou, dat is toch nog veel langer dan 13 jaar geleden. Want ik ben al 54, geloof ik, hè?
Ja. Nee, waarom lach je?
Ik moet vreselijk om hem lachen. Zijn fantasie gaat vaak een beetje met ons af, hè?
We leven nou toch in 86, of niet?
Nee.
Oh.
Probeer eens beter te herinneren.
92?
Nog iets beter.
94?
Ja. Dan heb je hier is een krant. Weet je wat er op het ogenblik bijvoorbeeld de oorlog in Joegoslavië, weet je dat aan de gang is?
Nee, weet ik niets van.
Joegoslavië was een keurig land in het Russische blok. Maar er is nou een gruwelijke burgeroorlog aan de gang.
De mensen gewoon die elkaar afslachten?
Slachten elkaar.
God, hoe komt dat?
Wisten we het maar, dan kon je het voorkomen.
Ja.
Wisten we maar hoe mensen in elkaar zaten.
Ja. Dat moet een heel mooi land zijn, hè, Joegoslavië.
Ja. En nu kun je er dus beter niet wonen. Nee.
Ja.
Derek,
Yes.
do you remember the first time you played the piano?
Yes.
Do you remember?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
What kind of a piano was it, or was it an organ?
It was an organ. Can I play the organ?
Yeah.
Daddy's wigging.
No, there's no organ here. But the first organ, do you remember what kind of sound it was the first time you played the organ?
Yes. It was Father Peter's organ.
Hmm?
Yes. Which organ?
The organ at home.
Yeah.
We were very young.
Yes.
You were a child.
Yes. Do you like rise and trot, do you? Oh dear.
Okay, Derek?
Yeah.
Do you want to play along with that? Not that one. Listen and play at the same time. Listen and play.
Kijk, een belangrijke geheugenfunctie, een van de dingen die we echt goed moeten onthouden, is hoe de wereld er nu bij staat. En aangezien de wereld steeds verandert, moeten we dat dus steeds verversen. Daarvoor is het nodig dat we nieuwe indrukken op zijn plaats zetten en de oude vernietigen. Als ik aan mijn vrouw denk, dan denk ik aan hoe ze er nu uitziet. Als mijn vrouw eigenlijk verwacht dat ik er iedere dag uitzie zoals toen we trouwden, heeft ze iedere dag een onaangename verrassing. Want zo zie ik er al niet meer uit. Maar het komt nooit voor dat ze 's ochtends wakker wordt en dan zegt, wie is dat? Want ze heeft mijn beeld voortdurend ververst. Het gekke is dat als we mensen na lange tijd weer zien, dan zien we dat hij enorm veranderd is. Maar de mensen in onze eigen omgeving, die we een even lange tijd kennen, daar realiseren we ons dat helemaal niet van. Juist omdat we dat voortdurend opfrissen. En het is een ontzaglijk belangrijke functie van het geheugen om irrelevante informatie dus ook inderdaad te kunnen verwijderen. Of althans te zorgen dat dat niet voortdurend een rol blijft spelen. Vergeten is haast even belangrijk als onthouden. Het vervelende is natuurlijk dat af en toe wordt een beroep op ons gedaan om een vroegere toestand van de wereld ineens weer te reproduceren. En als we die actief vernietigd hebben, kunnen we in de problemen komen.
En dat gebeurt regelmatig.
En dat gebeurt natuurlijk regelmatig. Je zou je kunnen voorstellen dat je een video-opname hebt waarvan de videoband in verloop van de tijd verbleekt. De beelden verdwijnen er gewoon van. Of nog erger, waar iemand naderhand iets anders opneemt. Zodat als je hem weer afspeelt, staat er heel wat anders op dan jij dacht.
Dat gebeurt gemeenlijk meer dan wij denken. Hè? Dat een ervaring die heen schuift over een eerdere ervaring, in feite die eerste ervaring transformeert tot iets anders of laat verdwijnen.
Ja, en ik denk zelfs dat het een buitengewoon essentiële functie is van het geheugen.
John F. Kennedy. Als ik zeg John F. Kennedy, wat denk je dan aan?
Ja, dat is een gewezen president van de Verenigde Staten.
Maar je kunt je niet herinneren wat er gebeurde op de dag dat hij vermoord werd. Wat jij toen deed.
Nee. Is hij toen vermoord?
In 62 geloof ik.
Oh. Dat weet ik niet.
Ja.
Oh, ja, weet ik niet. John F. Kennedy.
Doodgeschoten.
Oh ja.
Ja.
Door Lee Oswald, geloof ik, hè?
Perfect. Zeggen ze.
Zeggen ze.
Voor hetzelfde geld is het een samenzwering.
Ja.
Waar iedereen pas over een eeuw achterkomt. Hè? Ja.
Oh?
Niemand weet wat er gebeurd is eigenlijk.
Nee. Maar waarom hebben ze hem eigenlijk doodgeschoten?
Dat weet niemand.
Dat was toch een goede president, was dat? Hè?
Ja. Ja, kun je hem nog voor de geest halen? Dat brillantinekapsel.
Ja, ik kan hem nog wel voor de geest halen.
Hij stond op een gegeven moment bij de Berlijnse muur. Een toespraak te houden in Berlijn.
Oh ja.
Toen was de muur er nog.
Oh ja.
Die is nou gevallen.
Ja.
De muur is weg.
Oh ja.
What does everybody remember the day Kennedy was assassinated? What did you do?
I've no idea. I just don't have flashbulb memories. I don't seem to. I can remember something around about that time.
But you didn't hear the news?
No,
or...
I don't remember where I heard the news. And that's true for all the events. The Challenger disaster, Margaret Thatcher's resignation, you name it. I don't have a flashbulb memory.
Isn't there
for it.
one that's specially British? That well, maybe Thatcher's that's especially British.
Well, there's a big study being done on Margaret Thatcher's resignation, which I can. But no, I can't remember where I heard
I'll
that.
tell you the truth, I can't remember. I don't trust that kind of memory because I think that's indirect. Now, this is not a direct experience. It's a cue, if you want, where that is one experience cues the other experience. So whatever it was that you were doing at the time of Kennedy's assassination, the two get linked together. I think that's different from a very, very vivid experience that might be directly accessed. And so I don't see the two.
People say they have good memories. For instance, the moment Kennedy was killed.
That's
So
right.
I know perfectly well what I was doing. My mother came into the bathroom and said to me, "John F. Kennedy has been killed."
Yeah.
Really?
And those flashbulb memories, are they true?
I have a very strong.
I do too.
Yeah, and I think it is because what you mentioned earlier is the emotional content. There's a shock value about it.
It's rehearsed heavily, though. The 5-year anniversary of his death, the 10-year anniversary, and there's lots of what were you doing when, and so that helps people remind themselves of what. Some people, not all people, remind themselves of what they were doing. But the research on these flashbulb memories, remember it was originally proposed that these were special. So you might want to say, well, this is not quite like my valedictorian trauma, but still, this was a trauma for lots of people. And yet, researchers who have studied these flashbulb memories show that basically, they follow the same laws as ordinary memory, and
That is to say,
well, that they decay with time. They're vulnerable to distortion. Some people have studied two individuals who were supposedly together when this happened, and they tell different stories. You've got the proof that at least one of them is giving you an erroneous recollection.
Richard, look at those three. Which one do you like best?
Shetland Island, wake up in the morning.
Oh, Shetland Islands.
Ochely Shetland Isles, jij was in de stad in de February.
have you been there?
Like I go one day.
No.
No?
Never, not yet.
Not yet.
What about this one? Do you like it?
Yes. Landing windmill in Cyprus.
In Cyprus.
And when?
Yeah. Sun shining, wake up in the morning. I am morning, evening. Go
What
down.
about this one? What about this one? Right one.
Ligt on the border. Je kunt maybe lach. Aanzeigen the borders. Je kunt maybe lach.
That's very good, isn't it? Lovely. Lovely picture. Where is that one, Richard?
Je kunt outside Moscow.
Yes, where is that?
Right on the Siberian coast in the snow.
Siberian coast, my goodness.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Ons geheugen, schreef Louis Boenwel, wordt voortdurend belaagd door fantasie en dromerij. En omdat het verleidelijk is om in de realiteit van het denkbeeldige te geloven, maken we uiteindelijk onze leugens tot waarheid. De schrijvers doen het rustig aan vandaag. Het idee dat ons geheugen eerder aanschurkt tegen de verbeelding dan tegen de werkelijkheid is hen zo vertrouwd dat het amper vragen lijkt op te roepen. Mevrouw Nobbe heeft net wat gegeten. Broodje kaas, broodje leverworst, kop koffie. Maken de smaak van de kaas en de geur van de koffie nog wat herinneringen bij haar los, al is het maar in een flart van een seconde. Je kunt het haar wel vragen, maar ze lijkt je niet meer te begrijpen. Waarom ze hier nou echt is, dat zal langzaam duidelijk worden, nemen we aan. Is Moritz kommer op het kasteel met zijn vrouw Gonneke, omdat zijn geheugen geen herinneringen meer opslaat na die hersenbloeding 14 jaar geleden? Eigenlijk niet. Ook bij hem zullen we later bezien waarom hij hier wel is. Dat geldt ook voor Richard Wavro uit Schotland en voor de kleine Derek Paravaccini uit Engeland. Gabriel Minne doet intussen in de kamer van de oud-tantes boven de vreemdste geheugenproeven. Maar ook daarover weer later. In de hal staat het koor, met oppervoorzanger Hans Bloemendaal. Ooit deed hij auditie om voorzanger te worden. Het was in de jaren voor de Holocaust, toen zijn ouders en zusje nog leefden.
Ik was toen bijna 14 en ik zou voorzingen voor toelating op het conservatorium voor een beurs. Nou, ik heb dat gedaan bij de hoofdlerares. En dat is niet al te ongunstig verlopen. En ze vroeg me toen ook, zo bijna zoals u vraagt, in welk milieu groei je dan op? En zou je nu überhaupt in die vreselijke tijd dat doen? Zou je zo'n onzekere carrière misschien beginnen? Nou, ik zei toen in mijn jeugdige overmoed natuurlijk ja. Ik wou natuurlijk die beurs ook hebben. En toen zei ze tegen me, maar luister eens eventjes, jongen. Ik heb begrepen dat jij orthodox Joods bent. Stel je nou voor, je zou een operazanger, stel je voor. Of zelfs een oratoriumzanger. En je moet op vrijdagavond optreden in een of andere concerthaal. Wat zou je dan doen? Nou, ik had nog geen kans om te antwoorden. Mijn moeder, die bij die sessie erbij was, die zei, er komt niks van in. Nou, gesprek afgelopen. En toen heeft ze ook mij weten te overtuigen dat het verstandiger was om het eindexamen van... het is volslagen verkeerd. U moet het eruit schrappen. Nu ging de herinnering niet goed. Die hele gebeurtenis is namelijk was in Amsterdam al. Die was in Amsterdam in de oorlog. Ik was al weg uit. U moet een groot stuk schrijven. Sorry.
Het is een illustratie.
Het is
een
fantastische illustratie. Ik wou even vertellen hoe ik dat proef moest zingen. Maar het moment dat ik dat moest doen, dat was voor de grote deportaties en na de repatriatie. Ik was al in Amsterdam en ik ging al op de HBS.
Maar even zat u in uw herinnering in Fulda?
Ja, daar heb ik het dus mixed up. Ja. Ik heb mixed up. Ja. Omdat ik daar ben begonnen te zingen. Sorry, het is de eerste keer dat ik u ophoud. Maar goed, je hebt een hele praktische illustratie hoe belazerd eigenlijk dat geheugen werkt. Wat doen we?
Zal ik u zeggen. Als je naar zigeuners kijkt...
Ja.
Die zeggen eigenlijk elke morgen bij het opstaan... vergeet de vorige dag.
Ja.
Ze zeggen het al bij het slapen gaan.
Ja.
Geen herinneringen conserveren.
Ja.
Dat heeft zo zijn eigen traditie en
Ja.
oorzaak. Als je dat tegen een Jood zegt...
Ja.
dan zegt hij... herinner je de vorige dag. Herinner je de vorige week. Herinner je de vorige jaren.
Ja.
Herinner je de vorige eeuwen. Ja?
Ja. Dat is typisch Joods. Die leven op herinneringen.
Ja.
Ja. Maar neem niet weg, wat doen we met het verknoeide stukje interview? Ik heb gewoon iets gezegd wat niet klopt.
Ja, zo zie je hoe betrekkelijk de herinneringen van mensen zijn. Die een kern van waarheid hebben, maar niet waar zijn.
Ze hebben door de tijd een heel ander beeld van jou gekregen dan je werkelijk...
En misschien ook beïnvloed door het beeld wat men nu van mij heeft.
Wil je daar een voorbeeld van geven?
Een voorbeeld is dat ik niet zo lang geleden een lerares... die ik zeer hoog schatte, ondanks dat ik een buitengewoon slechte leerling was op de middelbare school. Omdat ik andere interesses had. Die herinnerde zich dat ik buitengewoon fraaie vertalingen maakte. En dat is echt niet waar. Ik kon zelfs geen opsteller schrijven vroeger. En we hebben ooit eens 1 keer een opstel moeten schrijven... en daar heb ik een andere jongen voor geld een opstel laten schrijven. Want ik verdiende toen al geld omdat ik deels ook professioneel in de muziek zat. Soms ging ik zo van de dancing naar school zonder te slapen. En dus ik had helemaal geen tijd voor die flauwekul. En het is ook uitgekomen, maar dat kon ik daar niet eens.
Maar omdat je later de grote schrijver bent geworden...
Denkt men dat ik toen ook al zo bedreven met de pen was. Dat is absoluut niet zo.
Je weet niet precies waar eigenlijk die herinneringen vandaan komen. Een heel sterk voorbeeld hebben we onlangs gehad in een experiment over de Bijlmer ramp. Waar we aan mensen gevraagd hebben of ze de televisiefilm gezien hebben waarop het neerstortende vliegtuig zichtbaar was. Bij onze laatste versie daarvan zei 60% dat ze die film gezien hadden. Zo'n film heeft nooit bestaan, natuurlijk. Maar ieder heeft bij het horen van de verhalen over die ramp direct beelden geconstrueerd. En je hebt eigenlijk geen mogelijkheid om je te realiseren dat die beelden niet van buiten afgekomen zijn, maar door jezelf geconstrueerd. Het wordt gewoon op elkaar geplakt en de illusie staat dat je een totale herinnering hebt aan wat er indertijd gebeurd is.
60% heeft gezien hoe dat vliegtuig neerstortte.
Ja, en de 40% die dat niet heeft gezien, die hebben niet de mogelijkheid om geconstrueerde beelden te scheiden van werkelijk geziene beelden, maar die hebben de logische truc toegepast dat ze gedacht hebben, die beelden kunnen helemaal niet bestaan. Die heb ik wel, maar ik kan dat niet gezien hebben. Die realiseren zich dat omdat er een logische onmogelijkheid is.
Maar die 60% geloofde heilig in het zien dat ze gezien hebben dat het vliegtuig neerstort.
Ja, en die 60% kan je dus ook vragen stellen over de inhoud van die beelden. En daar zijn ze op zekere punten totaal met elkaar oneens. Want ze hebben het ieder voor zich geconstrueerd. Op andere punten zijn ze totaal met elkaar eens. Want we maken allemaal dezelfde constructies. Dus bijvoorbeeld in die Bijlmer ramp is, ik meen 98% erover eens dat dat vliegtuig horizontaal door de wijk vloog en op een gegeven moment tegen die flat aanvloog. Waar dat vandaan komt, is niet duidelijk. Er zijn van die films, van die grote ongelukfilms met gigantische flatgebouwen waar zo'n vliegtuig halverwege in steekt. Dat beeld kan ze opgedrongen hebben. Het kan zijn dat door de rapporten van mensen die zeiden, ja, ik zag een vliegtuigvleugel langs mijn raam komen, dat ze daardoor gedacht hebben, hij moet horizontaal gevlogen. Maar daar is men dus over eens, terwijl het dus absoluut niet zo is. Dat vliegtuig is niet horizontaal, zeg maar, laverend door die wijk gegaan, maar is vrijwel verticaal op die flat gevallen. Over de vraag wanneer er nou eigenlijk brand ontstond, of dat vliegtuig al brandde toen het viel, of dat de brand ontstond op het moment dat hij die flat raakte, of dat het nog vele seconden duurde voor de vlammen uit die flat kwamen. Daar zijn ze totaal oneens over, want daarover zijn geen standaard beelden beschikbaar. In het nieuws is er vrij weinig over gezegd en iedereen heeft daar zo zijn eigen idee over. En als je ze de keus tussen die 3 mogelijkheden geeft, dan krijg je gewoon 30% verdeling.
Memory can be very tricky, and I remember, for example, I can give a very interesting example of that, one of the books by Flaubert that has impressed me more is L'Éducation sentimentale, sentimental education, and I remember something very, impressive to me at the end of the book when these 2 friends who are the characters, Frédéric and Delorier, remember their common past, and finally they decided that probably the best shared souvenir that they had was a brother that they visited when they were young, and a brother that had their windows painted green, color green. One of my strongest memories of my youth was a brother in Piura, in a city in the northern Peru. A house that was isolated from the city in the desert, painted green, and this association, was something that impressed me very, very much. Well, I told this story many times, how much I had been impressed when I read L'Éducation sentimentale and discovered, that this coincidence. And one day, to my big surprise, a literary critic, one of those critics who know everything and who have read everything, told me, but this is a false memory, because in L'Éducation sentimentale, when Frédéric and Delorier remembered their past and remembered that brothel, La Maison de la Turque, the Turkish wife house, they don't say a word about green windows. There is no green color there. It's something that you have put, that your memory has added to the real thing, So I went very, very, very surprised to verify, and actually the green color is something that was not there. It was a false memory, and...
Hold a second, what about the second part of memory, about that brothel in Peru?
No, that I think it's inaccurate.
Have you checked that?
It doesn't exist anymore,
Oh,
but I think it's, because it was not the windows, it was the whole house.
Hold a second, what was first? Flaubert,
the Piura brother,
But you know what it may be? It's very funny. Well, because the green is the color of speranza.
Yeah. Well, and in that city and in that part, it was a totally unusual color because
anomaly. Yeah.
Piura is a city, or it was a very small city surrounded by a desert, sand desert without trees. So the green color was totally, eccentric there.
No, not eccentric. It was a terrific statement.
Yeah, it was a statement against infertility.
Yeah.
But this color
and also the color of hope. Yeah.
This color. Well, for us, young
that's
boys, it was the color of hell. It was the color that awakened in us. Fantastic, visions of hell.
Do you like the snow?
Yeah, we have snow. Rather than be springtime.
What do you like, the summer or the winter or springtime?
Summer.
Why?
Go for summer.
Why do you like the summer?
Beautiful weather.
Sun? Green?
Green.
What is the color of the summer?
autumn.
But what is the color of the summer?
Flowers.
Yes. And what kind of colors?
Daffodils.
What kind of color has springtime?
Blossom.
And the winter?
Christmas. Christmas snow.
Wat we ons herinneren is een mengsel van wat we gezien hebben. Een mengsel van vaste schema's die al lang bestonden. En een mengsel van dingen die we daar achteraf nog over gehoord hebben. Het construeren van informatie in het geheugen is een doorgaand proces, gaat altijd door. Juist omdat we de stand van de wereld, hoe die er nu uitziet, bij moeten houden, moeten we dus alles wat binnenkomt integreren met de bestaande kennis. En dat mengsel, daarvan zijn de verschillende herkomsten zijn er niet meer aan te herkennen.
I think when we talk about memory, we have to bring reality into the picture. We have to deal with that word and that concept. Because you talked about correcting reality in relation to our frustrations and wanting to, the ways in which we, as it were, invent because we may have liked to have lived differently. Brodsky talks about animating reality. I confess that reality is reality seems to me to be 1,000-octave kind of piece of music, of which one only is aware of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So when we talk about memory, one is always talking about something in which one perceives so little. Something of which what one retains is so much of a fragment. So we constantly have to weave out of what it is that we know, out of what it is that we think we remember, and out of what it is that we didn't know that we knew, but that only comes about in the process of actually doing it. So much of memory is activated in the process.
Richard, what is this picture from?
Midwest, gewoon Lego Montana. Montana, Midwest. Maybe Rocky Mountain.
Rocky Mountains.
Lilac flowers.
Lilac flowers, yeah.
Equal 1992. 92.
What time did you
well,
finish?
we see snow.
You see snow in the mountain far away.
If you look outside,
yeah,
there's snow also today.
there's snow today.
Can you see it or not?
Yeah, here.
Well, have a look outside, Richard. It's snowing.
It's snowing.
Yes, it is snowing.
Yeah.
Do you like snow?
Yeah.
Oh, I bet.
Do you like snow, Richard?
We bet. A little.
But it is beautiful, isn't it, snow?
Yeah.
Or?
No.
Do you like the color white?
Richard.
Yeah.
Do you like white in a painting?
Yeah.
White?
Yeah.
No.
Because I don't see very much
no,
white.
I think he seldom uses white unless he's drawing snow. But you see, that's white.
Yes, but you don't like it?
No.
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 Why not?
Oh,
well, literally road.
He has to paint over it, with other colors to make it a dirty white. He seldom uses white, pure white color.
Hoeveel kunnen mensen nou eigenlijk fantaseren, desalniettemin, over hun eigen verleden, zonder dat ze zich bewust zijn dat ze fantaseren?
Een zaak waaraan ik gewerkt heb, had betrekking op 3 kinderen die hebben meegemaakt dat hun pleegzusje werd vermoord. Daarna hebben ze daar 8 jaar over gezwegen en toen zijn ze naar de rechter gestapt. En bij de rechter komen ze alle 3 eigenlijk met een totaal verschillend verhaal. De verschillen hebben betrekking op hoe het meisje is vermoord, wanneer ze is vermoord en door wie ze is vermoord. Dat nogal essentiële gegevens voor een rechtbank. De verklaring daarvoor is dat ze indertijd niet precies hebben begrepen wat ze nou eigenlijk hadden gezien. De realisering, we hebben een moord gezien, is een kwestie van nadere bewerking van die geheugeninhouden. En door die nadere bewerking van die geheugeninhouden ontstaan er verschillen en komen ze uiteindelijk alle drie met een totaal verschillend verhaal. Het gemeenschappelijke daarin is dat ze alle drie weten dat hun zusje vermoord is. Maar dat zijn naderhand ook gigantische verschillen geïntroduceerd. En of geen van drieën heeft gelijk, of één van drie heeft gelijk, maar er kunnen er niet twee gelijk hebben en zeker niet drie, want de verhalen zijn conflicterend. En er zijn er dus tenminste twee, mogelijk drie, die nu voortleven met een heel verkeerd idee over wat ze nou indertijd hebben meegemaakt. En dat is niet zomaar een eenvoudige belevenis, dat is een van de cruciale gebeurtenissen in hun leven. En ons vak leert dus dat de belangrijkheid geen garantie is voor de accuraatheid. Integendeel, je zou juist kunnen voorstellen dat dat wat enorm belangrijk is, voortdurend heroverwogen, voortdurend herkauwd wordt. En juist door die herkauwing laat je het niet met rust. En creëer je de gelegenheid om daar steeds veranderingen aan te brengen.
But you know, there's one thing that I want to bring in here, and that is that some recent work in developmental psychology that seems to indicate that autobiographical memory is distinct from what we call episodic memory. That is the actual perceptual, if you want, memory for events. And that autobiographical memory starts to develop when children become a little more adept at using language. And it's developed in the social context. That is to say, the version that you're talking about of your own life that you remember later on is a highly rehearsed version that you've developed with your parents and your siblings and your friends, and which you rehearse and revise continuously throughout your life. So that this to me was a bit of a revelation when I came across the work of Catherine Nelson in particular on this, because it teases apart two areas of memory that previously were lumped together, and namely the direct experience and the memory of an experience that you have, which we usually call episodic memory, and the verbal narrative that you develop, that you tap later on, so that the evidence is that when you try to recall episodes in your life, very often what you're really tapping is your highly rehearsed verbal narrative of your autobiographical version of your life, which is, of course, subject to all of the kinds of errors and corrections and so on of social pressures and social environments that you're developing in. And the interesting thing is that we used to think that the reason the reason most adults don't have good memories of, let's say, the time in their lives before the age of 5, was that the hippocampus wasn't mature. This was the theory that came out in the 70s. The structure in the temporal lobe that supposedly says now print and stores memory, converts them into permanent memories, was not there. Well, that turns out not to be true. Nelson demonstrated that young children, 2 years of age, have episodic memories, but they have to be tapped right away within a few days because they have no mechanism of accessing these memories later on. They can't talk about them. They don't have a verbal autobiographical version of the events. And it's only later on when they develop these verbal skills in a social context that they start to develop this big picture. So that to some degree, it's understandable that you could have constant revisions to this verbal narrative.
Ja, en Rusland is ook niet meer communistisch.
Oh ja, is dat zo?
Ja.
Oh.
Oude partijelite, de oude communistische, stalinistische structuur is uit elkaar gevallen.
Oh ja?
En ze proberen daar nu een democratie op te bouwen, maar dat gaat echt heel erg moeilijk.
Ja.
Ja. Nee, ik heb een half uur of 3 kwartier geleden praat ik even met je over Joegoslavië. Kun je dat nog herinneren?
Nee.
Joegoslavië was ook een communistisch land.
Ja.
Maar daar is nu een burgeroorlog.
Oh ja? Proberen ze het af te schudden?
Nee, onderling. Het land wordt opgedeeld in 3 groepen, belangrijke groepen, die tegen elkaar aan het strijden zijn.
Oh ja.
Elkaar massaal afslachten.
Maar ik denk dat Morris wel kan zeggen welke groepen dat zijn.
Wat?
Ik denk dat jij wel kan zeggen welke groepen dat zijn. In Joegoslavië.
Die 3 groepen?
Ja?
Zou ik niet weten. Als iemand het zegt, dan zeg ik, oh ja.
Ga je beginnen met de Kroaten?
Kroaten, Serviërs en moslims.
Ja.
Ja. Ja.
It does leave us with the question, well, how do we know this is a real memory? And then you have to ask, how do we know any memories are real memories?
No, exactly. Yeah.
That's my, as a non-specialist in the area of real memory. That's exactly the distinction I was trying to make earlier when I was asking about true episodic memory and true semantic memory. The possibility, my own experience has it, that I have in my head a very nice machine that will take fragments of my memory, and it's called the plausibility device. You see, it shows up on a PET scan. It's a big bright thing over here, and it goes, now if that happened and this is that and this is all part of the same memory, then these things must have happened in between, and it fills in all those things, and it links it up. And it comes out, if you ask me what happened, I will give you a very nice verbal report. I will not have me on the airplane and then in the train without landing first. It will fill in the details for me nicely. I somehow feel the operation of that creature for my older memories, that when you ask me what happened, when you ask for an episode of memory, and it's more than some number of years ago, that machine is at work filling in. I have the fragments of true memories, but it is making up the continuity. And somewhat, it's even making up what I'm feeling. As opposed to memories 3 years ago, in which I don't have that sense at all. There I have the sense of being a passive participant, and I can actually see this thing clicking by as a memory. And what you're telling me is there is no such real distinction.
It's just that it has to work harder in one case than in the other. And indeed, you get patients who've lost this system as a result of frontal lobe damage. And they will come up firmly convinced of things that are patently false.
That they've confabulated themselves, that
right, yes.
have been suggested to them? Or?
Not necessarily suggested to them. Very often they've confabulated themselves. So a patient with bilateral frontal lobe damage waking up and turning to his wife and saying, "Why do you keep telling people we're married?" And she said, "But we are married. We've got 3 children." Well, that doesn't mean we're married. So she gets out the wedding photographs and shows them to him. And he said, "That chap does look very like me, but it's not me, because I'm not married."
Now, what were you saying about wanting to avoid your past?
Okay, well, that makes a sharp thing. So, but it is the point, then, that you can have, indeed, it can be the case that you're introducing memories that never happened.
Right. Now, how do we know they're real memories? Yes. And I tell you, I've sat around with graduate students for hours trying to figure out how are we going to demonstrate if it's true that these are real memories or that any of the false memories we create. And one of my students came up with a very clever idea that let's ask if they bet money on these memories. And so we created an experiment where they had the opportunity to bet money, hypothetical money, and they were willing to bet almost as much on their false but suggested memories as on their true memories. Not quite as much, but almost.
In 79 zijn we getrouwd en in maart 80 heb jij die hersenbloeding gehad. Ja,
herinner je de trouwdag nog?
Nee. Ik weet niet eens waar we getrouwd zijn.
Nee, dat klopt.
In Velsen?
Ja, hartstikke goed.
Je bent op leeftijd.
Ja, hij is in vorm.
Ja.
Maar dat is wel leuk, want we logeerden nog wel eens met mijn ouders in Zandpoort. En als we dan met de bus naar het strand gaan of naar IJmuiden, dan kom je langs het stadhuis in Velsen. En dan zeg ik tegen Morris, nou hier zijn we nou getrouwd. En dan Morris keihard in de bus, zijn we hier getrouwd? Dus dan zie je mensen soms wel een beetje raar opkijken van, wat is dit?
Ja.
Maar je weet toch wel dat je met Gon getrouwd bent?
Ja, tuurlijk.
Ja.
Ik zie haar toch dagelijks. Ja. Ze woont toch bij mij in?
Ja, dus dan moet het wel kloppen.
Ja.
Ja. Listen, there was a fascinating experiment or study. I think it was in Cambridge, UK. That there was a kind of congress of scientists, and afterwards everybody was asked to report what they remembered about the sessions. Do you remember?
No, who did this study? I mean, it sounds like something we might do, but...
Did you write about it?
Maybe we should go off and do that.
Did you write about it?
I don't know. Did I?
You
read
did.
So much.
I'm sure you did.
I must have read it somewhere then. And so what did... few more retrieval cues, and then
One of the conclusions was that various people were reporting events that never took place at all, or had enormous distortions of what their colleagues had been said during the conference. Don't you remember?
I don't remember that, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. Because,
Sounds very familiar.
Yes. I mean, first, there are many other, collateral findings that you could bring in to predict that. We don't remember the verbatim, at least not for very long, the verbatim of what was said to us. We remember only the gist, and in the process of trying to remember that gist, you would bring in all the reconstructive apparatus, and then there'd be all the prestige-enhancing memories, so you'd remember that you contributed more than you actually did, and you said things that were more insightful than you actually did, and all of that would lead you to suspect lots of error built into that situation.
We see ourselves always in a better light than we really were. How familiar is that? How can you know?
Well, Brodsky spoke earlier. I don't think it's true. Well, you don't see yourself in a better light. In fact, memory is very much is the mother of guilt, of sense of guilt, yeah. Well, that is, if you have any guilt based, if your sense of guilt is based on anything, it's precisely on your memories of your past conduct. Well, and you never get rid of that. Well, and not simply by accumulation of the subjects of guilt, yeah, but just simply, your attitude. Well, you may philosophize about what happened, but you remember what did happen. Yeah. No, I don't. I think memory is complex enough without our falsifying it, and I don't think we falsify. Well, it just if we falsify, we know that we do actually. Yeah. Somehow we do.
Do we?
Yeah. Huh?
Do we?
Well, somehow we do. Yeah. Well. You see, I do believe in a very strong superior ego thing. Yeah. Well, in people, that is the mind, the reason, presides over the whole thing. That is in that respect. The system portrayed, the scheme offered, the structure offered by Freud is not entirely true. Well, because I think our subconscious, our instincts, our God knows what, do report to the reason, to the mind. Yeah, we always know what we do, I think. Well, that is, it's like, in a sense, the centralized state is a good replica of what transpires in one's mind.
How about the empirical findings that we remember that we gave more to charity than we really did, or we took more airplane trips, or we had kids that walked and talked at an earlier age than they actually did, or some work that I and others have done, we voted in a recent election when we didn't really vote, as proven by the election records. So these are all ways in which we remember ourselves as better off than we were, a better person. That's the superiority complex of memory.
But I think you don't write only out of nostalgia for disappeared past, I think there is an element of rejection, of correction, of rebuilding differently, the word that is preserved in your memory. So, and I would say this is what is typically literary, this reconstruction of reality, the creation of alternative reality out not objective facts and events we witness or we were part of, but as something that we would have liked to be the real world, and it wasn't. And for that reason, we had to invent it, with words and with fictitious recollections and memories, which in most cases are actually inventions and fantasies,
Over wat soort dingen praat ze toch nog regelmatig, die regelmatig terugkomen? Is daar een bepaald vast patroon in? Of?
Nee, er zit geen vast patroon in. Nee. U ziet het, het is verschillend. De ene geeft zijn antwoord en dan slaan ze weer dicht.
Het enige is dat ze wel veel meer dingen uit de vroege jeugd.
Ja.
Zijn het alleen liedjes of zijn het ook wel eens verhalen of opmerkingen of zinnetjes waar ze mee komt? Alsof ze weer...
Wat zeg je? Wat het moet zijn?
Nee.
Wat dan?
Ik vraag even.
Wat vraag je? Zeg het maar. Als ik iets vraag en ik vraag de tweede keer, dan weet ze het niet meer. Dus nou praat ze tegen me, dan versta ik het niet. Komt dat het half gebroken is. En dan vraag ik, wat zeg je? En dan weet ze het niet meer. Dan geef ze de tweede keer geen antwoord meer.
Zo snel weg, bam, boem.
Ja.
Binnen een seconde.
Ja.
Is er een gedachte en is binnen
Ja.
een seconde weer weg.
En ze heeft ook weer een gedachte binnen een seconde.
Maar ze luistert nu heel goed.
Ja. Ze neemt het wel op. Maar het komt er niet uit meer.
Opgesloten in haar eigen hoofd.
Ja. En dan weet je niet wat ze zelf denken. Dan zitten ze stil en voor hen uit te staren. En dan weet je niet wat ze denken.
Je weet niet eens of ze denken.
Nee. Weet je niet.
Zei u, mevrouw Nobbe? Mevrouw Nobbe?
Nou, er wordt wat aan je gevraagd.
Ja.
Die meneer die vraagt wat aan je.
Wat zei u? Hoorde u iets zeggen?
Wat is...
Here's the introduction. Ready? One. You play as well.
Het leven heeft zich nooit aan mij voorgedaan, als een reeks duidelijk herkenbare overgangen, schrijft Brodsky. Het rolt eerder voort als een sneeuwbal. En hoe langer het duurt, des te meer de ene plaats lijkt op de andere, en des te meer de ene tijd op de andere lijkt. Wie van de gasten op het kasteel zal over 20 jaar nog leven? En wat zullen de overlevenden zich dan nog herinneren? Van de ontmoetingen op het kasteel, van de schilderijen in de gangen, van het weer, van de stemming waarin men was of kwam, van de piano die nu en dan opklinkt uit de Chinese kamer, hoe het rook in de hal.
Zouden de planten en de struiken er destijds werkelijk anders uitgezien hebben zoals ik altijd beweerd heb? Waarschijnlijk wel. Vergelijk de afbeeldingen van vroeger maar met die van nu. Bovendien roken ze anders. Ik geloof zelfs dat hun schaduwen anders waren dan die van nu. Oh, er zijn nog wel bomen van vroeger over, maar die zijn vast alles vergeten. Ze stellen geen belang in hun eigen verleden. Toevallig ken ik een zeer oude graspriet en die zegt ook van niets te weten. Ik heb met oud lover gesproken. Geen woord meer over vroeger. Het is voorbij. Het is voorbij. De hekken gaan langzaam dicht. Merk je dat de weg steeds nauwer wordt? In de verte, op de zandgronden, reden de legers langs. Het was duidelijk te horen. Ze reden rechtstreeks de geschiedenis in. Het liep slecht met ze af. Ze zijn niet teruggekomen. Ze zijn verdwenen.
Aan het begin van de 16e eeuw werd het kasteel belegerd door de bisschop van Utrecht. Van het aantal slachtoffers is nergens verslag gedaan. Alles wat rest zijn 2 roestende kanonskogels in de bibliotheek. Vlakbij het kasteel, in het moeras, zaten in een andere oorlog, die uit de 21ste eeuw, Canadese militairen ondergedoken. De baron bracht ze elke dag eten. Spannende tijd.
Hier, in dit bos, dat weet je niet, daarom zeg ik het even, lagen her en der dode soldaten. En natuurlijk stukken uitrusting. Het stonk hier verschrikkelijk. Kijk, en daar heb je het weer. In datzelfde bos kun je nu bij een kraampje snoep kopen. Je kunt er wandelen. Kortom, er dreigt geen enkel gevaar. En dat vind ik vreemd. En dan te bedenken dat er mensen zijn die, als je ze vertelt wat hier gebeurd is, alleen maar zeggen, oh ja? Meer zeggen ze niet. Het kan ze niet schelen. Daar kan ik niet over uit.
Wacht even. We hadden het over de vervalsing van onze alledaagse herinneringen. Niet over de oorlog. De vraag of traumatische herinneringen anders bewaard of anders vervormd worden dan alledaagse, die vraag komen we pas volgende week tegen. Dan zullen we bezien hoe betrouwbaar herinneringen zijn aan de enige echte hel, die van de mensen. Maar Gerhard Durlachter neemt in de torenkamer een voorschot op die gedachtenwisseling, via de zoektocht. Zijn poging om via oud-kampgenoten de waarheid van toen terug te vinden of te bevestigen. Elizabeth Loftus en Willem Wagenaar, de beide geheugenpsychologen, die elkaar kennen van tal van internationale rechtszaken, waarbij ze als getuigendeskundigen optraden, nemen een pauze te baat om elkaar hier te treffen, in de kelder, vlak naast de vroegere knechtenkamer. Ook zij nemen een voorschot op die latere discussie.
We ran a number of studies on true and false stories. We produced true and false stories. We asked subjects to tell true and false stories, and then gave these stories, the taping, the videotapes of them telling it, to other people who judged, whose task it was to judge whether these were true stories or false stories. The results of that, say the bottom line of the results is that the false stories were more convincing than the true stories. So the feeling that you feel this is sincere, this is true, doesn't warrant, say, the truth of that story. On the contrary, I would say, as far as we know, the more you believe that this is a true story, the more you have to doubt it.
Really?
Now, I wouldn't really go that far, but I would only want to say the fact that a person is convincing and looks sincere, there's got nothing to do with it.
Right. Well, just one question about your study. Are the false stories ones, are they deliberately false? Are they're lies, or are they honestly believed but false?
No, they're lies.
Definite lies.
Yeah, definite lies. The way the experiment goes is that people are told about a certain movie they haven't seen, and then they're told, tell the story as if you've seen it. The person who's going to interview you doesn't know that you haven't seen it. So tell her a story that is good enough, and they get some time to prepare themselves to make up a good story, and they're very convincing.
Well, just thinking about the persuasibility of false stories, I think if a person had convinced himself, the self-deception, I would think that'd be even harder. I mean, you're already showing even when it's a lie, it's hard to tell. But if it's an honestly believed false story, then it's got to be impossible without corroboration.
Yeah, so I think, and of course that's the whole business of a court, is not simply to believe stories that people tell, but to find corroboration of those stories. And if you fail to find corroboration, then you've got a problem. Because I don't think that you can simply believe just any story a person is telling.
Right, well sometimes at least you can use corroboration to prove the story's false. So if it's geographically or biologically or physically or in some other way impossible, at least that's one way also to use corroboration to prove that it's false. Most of the cases that I'm involved in, there is no corroboration. All there is the person's story, and there's not only no corroboration, there's also a lot of proof that there was suggestion, that there were questionable techniques, that there was a lot of things going on before the story got crystallized.
Well, in our Yolanda case, of course, all the corroboration, all the attempts to find corroboration show that nothing of that is true. Nothing ever fits. But despite that, people argue that, well, it's possible that the details are wrong. That's the way memory works, you see. But in essence, the story must be right. Only the small details that you can check, that you can verify, they are not right. But the general flow of the story must be correct because you cannot make up such a thing. And I think what we have learned from a number of cases, like the Ingram case, is that people can make up such things. The whole flow and all the details. I think you can be wrong on almost anything. I don't know of an exception.
Well, you may need a little more time so that the real memories can fade a little more, but then I believe you can manipulate the details of memory for just about anything.
Yeah. And it's of course a problem because a fairly similar statement is people cannot make this up. This must be true. There's no way they can make this up. And I would say, I don't know of any, say, limit to imagination. People are really very imaginative. How do you say that?
Imaginative?
Imaginative.
Yeah.
They create wonderful inventions. And they create untrue stories, and they're brilliant at both. There's no limit to that. I'm not sure we can remember anything at all the way it really happened. As soon as we go into detail, you reach the point where you're going to be wrong. So you can only say that we remember something the way it happened if you talk about, say, the global thing, the rough thing. But you can always ask for detail, more detail, and then at the end you will be wrong, no matter what the topic is.
Ben je er überhaupt bang voor dat je, wat je geheugen betreft, veel dingen inprojecteert die er nooit geweest zijn?
Nou, dat is juist mijn grote angst geweest toen ik de gruwelijke jaren beschreef. En daarom heb ik, goddank, ben ik als socioloog opgeleid, heb ik geleerd om zoveel mogelijk te checken, te controleren. Daarom ook mijn reis naar Amerika, om die overlevenden zelf te spreken. Van mijzelf dacht ik, ben ik gek geworden? Dat kan niet waar geweest zijn. Pas toen ik bevestiging kreeg daarvan, dat zij hetzelfde gezien hadden, hetzelfde gehoord hadden, hetzelfde meegemaakt hadden, toen wist ik, het is waar geweest.
Maar dit is al een decennia na je ervaringen in het kamp.
Vele decennia, dat was in 86.
Ja. Dat je het gevoel had van, heb ik, wat destijds is gebeurd, heb ik dat echt meegemaakt? Is het eigenlijk gebeurd? Ja. Was het zo sterk? Dat je...
Nou, zo sterk was het niet. Kijk, ik had daarvoor al veel psychische hulp gehad en ik wist dat het gebeurd was. En ik hoefde alleen maar naar dit ding op mijn arm te kijken om te weten dat dat een nummer gestaan heeft. En dat weet ik ook nog heel precies. Maar hoe gruwelijk het was en hoe alles was, dat wilde ik weten van anderen. Want ik dacht, ja, het is een nachtmerrie.
Die op dat moment sterker terugkwam? In het verloop van je leven? Dat je...
Ja, dat was... Ja, ik heb dat geheugen en het zwijgen jarenlang opgelegd.
Tot het niet meer ging?
Tot het niet meer ging.
Tot het tegen jou begon te blaffen?
En hoe?
Terwijl jij zei van, het is toch mijn geheugen en mijn bewustzijn, niks meer.
Nee hoor. Dit is waarschijnlijk een soort psychologische bescherming die je krijgt. Anders word je gek.
Oh, 6. You don't want to go find Nana, do you? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16.
Finish now. Just got to walk to now.
No.
There's still a question of, could you really implant a complete memory or a stream of memories for having been molested, which seems in some of these actual cases to have actually happened when you have the luxury of being able to prove that it's false. But obviously we can't do it. And what would it take? What does it take to do it?
We know that some of the techniques developed by psychotherapists are very effective. In fact, I would even argue that psychotherapeutical techniques are designed to affect memory. That's what they are for. For various reasons, the objective of therapy is to affect or even to change the memories of a person. And we know that can be done quite well. So the question is not, can that be done to some people and can it be done in a short time? The answer is yes, definitely.
You know, here's a phenomenon that we're now seeing. You've got these, mostly women, but they've been in therapy. They've been led to believe that they were molested by this program of therapy and by the books they've been given to read and by the suggestions they've gotten. And now maybe they've accused their parents. And sometimes they report their parents to the police. They finally get out of this belief system. They realize their memories were false. And some of them have, in the U.S., have turned around and sued their former therapists for memory implantation. And despite the fact that they now are convinced their memories are false, and even when they've succeeded in some of their lawsuits, there are still people out there who are saying, well, I bet the original memories of abuse, those aren't the original memories. The original ones were the denials. But once they got the memories of abuse, that's real. And now that they have taken those memories back, they're back in denial. So you almost can't win in this situation. But I would like to use these as examples, even though they're not perfect proof, of the ability to actually create whole memories of abuse that never happened. And so in some sense, it's kind of a natural field experiment that we could never do, but has been done out there in the world.
That's the worrying thing, that we cannot do such experiments, but psychiatrists and clinical psychologists can, apparently. They can implant all sorts of memories in people without having been sued for it or getting any complaints. On the contrary, their clients are very grateful for having these memories implanted.
Right, well, because they are told that this is the ticket to healing. Yeah. And they have to come up with these memories, otherwise they're never going to feel better. I don't know what we do about the privacy of what goes on behind the door of a therapist. I mean, should we undo that privacy? I mean, should we, because it might be doing people harm in there, or what?
Was de behoefte om na te gaan, ben ik nou gek? Verbeeld ik me? Is dat nachtmerrie? Wat is dat? En dat gesprek met iedereen die eigenlijk dezelfde herinneringen had, heeft de zaak gewoon vastgezet. Ik moet erbij zeggen, bij een aantal van de jongens, dat heb ik net al gezegd, was die periode weggesneden uit hun leven. Totaal. Net zoals bij Henry in Buffalo. Maar daar was ik niet zo verbaasd over dat het niet meer aanwezig was. Ik vond het volkomen logisch.
Toch vertel je het verhaal niet volledig.
En dat is?
Je hebt geschreven, 1 gedachte dringt zich onafwendbaar aan mij op. Mijn zoektocht is veel meer dan het zoeken naar verhalen. Ik graaf naar lichtpunten in het zwarte verleden, naar tekenen van vriendschap en solidariteit, om de last der herinnering te verlichten.
Ja, ik begrijp wat je bedoelt. Het is ik zou bijna zeggen, een picture in our head. Om in die omstandigheden te zoeken naar vrienden. Je denkt dat dat echt vrienden waren. En dat geeft houvast.
Het was vreselijk in die kampen.
Maar je denkt, je hoopt. Ik dacht gewoon, ja, dat is een soort kameraadschap.
Dat was je herinnering, althans dat was wat je je wilde herinneren.
Wilde herinnering, precies. Ik zou willen zeggen, wat chocolade om de zware, zure pil te leggen.
Dat heb je in al die decennia gedaan. Dan ga je op zoek naar al die mensen van toen. Ja. En dan schrijf je vervolgens aan het eind van de zoektocht: de paradijselijke solidariteit is een illusie. Ja. Lijkt mij nu, hooguit vluchtige vriendschappen konden in het inferno bestaan.
Ja, maar dat is dubbel. Ik ging op zoek naar die kameraadschap. Maar ook op zoek om de bevestiging van mijn eigen herinneringen.
Goed, dat eerste lukt voor een groot deel. En de kameraadschap?
Nou, toen was hij er. Ze hebben me allemaal verschrikkelijk aardig ontvangen. En ook in Israël waren we één grote familie. Maar langzamerhand heb ik me gerealiseerd, ook toen ik het boek schreef, dat het net als het gewone leven is. Je was natuurlijk samengevangen en je moest elkaar ook helpen als het kan. En daar heb ik van gemaakt, er waren vriendschappen. Maar er waren een paar bij die me heel erg aan het hart gingen. En de andere, was vrij neutraal tegenover. En dat heb ik me pas na die reunie ook gerealiseerd. Je had elkaar heel hard nodig. Je liet elkaar ook niet echt vallen. Maar vriendschap, dat was het niet.
Dat was de herinnering die je bedroog om te kunnen blijven functioneren.
Precies.
I see these cases, maybe just in these sex abuse cases over the last 3 years, there have been, I don't know, 50 of them or something. There is rarely any corroboration. There's no good corroboration, and rarely anything that's even remotely corroboration. And I see the pain of the accused people and the accused families who get dragged through this process. In one case, even though the defendant won the case, still he spent $90,000, which would be typical to give yourself a good defense. So it's just a miserable situation. Yet I run into this opposition when I speak about these cases because people say, oh, you don't see the pain of the genuinely abused people and the misery they experience. So sometimes I wonder if I'm seeing a different sample of the world. I mean, I'm seeing the sample. There are these recovered memories. It's after lots and lots of suggestion, and there's no corroboration. And they're in litigation, which already makes it a special case. Am I missing part of a bigger picture where, I mean, I know there's real abuse out there, and there are horrible things that do happen, but I try to make that separation, and other people try to bring them all together. I have seen a case where, let's say, the person remembers, after a lot of suggestion, remembers all these events, and one judge will say, it just hasn't been proven that these specific acts actually happen, and I cannot find for the plaintiff, the one bringing the accusations. But a different judge on a different occasion will say, well, I don't see any specific proof for these, but something must have happened. I believe he abused her. And there'll be a conviction or there'll be a finding against the defendant just on this belief that something must have happened. And the difference in those cases, I mean, there are many differences when you go from one case to another, the credibility, the sincerity, whatever. But one difference is just the judge and what the judge is willing to decide on.
The problem, though, is, of course, that if a law would state we're not going to believe memories anymore, memories are not reliable enough, there must be something else apart from memories. That means probably that in whole categories of cases, like rape, abuse, and so, you cannot prosecute anymore because almost by definition there's nothing else but memories. So I think that's not going to work. I think what we need is criteria for, say, assessment of the reliability of memories. Some of the testimony must meet some, say, reasonable criteria, and a judge is, I think, in the first place there to apply criteria provided to him or her by the law. Right now there are no criteria, so there you get this arbitrariness.
Je hebt het verleden, je hebt het heden en dan is er ook nog de toekomst. Dat zijn er 3. Maar er is nog een 4e. Het verleden van de herinnering, van de verbeelding. En dat is een ander verleden. Het is met de wijsvinger ingekleurd, het is gekneed en verbogen, het is verschoven en gekrompen, het is verfomfaaid, hier dik en daar dun geworden. En men denkt dat het zo hoort. Hier is sprake van een onwrikbaar verlangen naar die idylle. Oh, wat is er mooier dan het verleden dat door de zee van de herinnering gegaan is. Een schoon gewassen verleden, ontdaan van elke smet of vlek. De omgekeerde utopie. De utopie met zijn beentjes in de lucht. De herinneringen waren zo talrijk, zo halstarrig, dat er nauwelijks plaats was voor iets nieuws. Het werd tijd dat er wat herinneringen opgeruimd werden, aan iemand meegegeven of zo, die ze dan weer op zijn beurt in een kuil kon werpen. Een beetje weg ermee.
Nou ja. Ja, je moest dat heb je het mooi gedaan.
Dat heeft u
ja,
mooi
dat
gedaan.
weet je, dat is heel goed. Dat zit alles erin. Dat is het. Dus.
Ja.
Hé? Hoezo, dat doen we zo.
Zullen we nog een liedje zingen? Van in Den Haag, daar woont een graaf.
Nee, mag het hoor.
In Den Haag, daar woont een graaf en zijn zoon heet Jantje. Als je vraagt waar woont je pa, wijst hij met zijn handje. Met zijn vingertje en zijn duim, op je hoed draagt hij een pluim. In zijn arme mandje, dag mijn lieve Jantje.
Ja, ik vind het mooi.
Ja, gaat u nog een keer meezingen? Gaat u nog een keer meezingen?
Nou, dan zal ik eens kijken hoor, dat ik het kan. Want
The brain, the mind and memory, the way it has developed through the evolution, was not designed for the court. Nature didn't build us such that we would be perfect witnesses in court. Our memory has other functions than being witnesses in court. Quite often the law wants minute details. For instance, in the Yolanda case, say one of the major problems was, if she had babies, did the pregnancy last 24 weeks or more? Because after that, say if she delivered babies and the babies were killed, it's murder. Before that, it's abortion. Now, how do witnesses know about 12 or 14 years ago how long a pregnancy lasted?
Well,
how do witnesses know that? I think it's an unreasonable question.
You know, I have another question about the Yolanda case that I gather, whatever the truth of the various claims, that her recollections keep on getting more and more and more extreme. In one case in which I was involved, the allegations start with, this even after a lot of therapy and a lot of suggestion, start with that the father made her fondle his penis in the shower. And then by the time they're done with this woman, she's remembering the father made her stick her fist up the anus of a horse. And she's got all these kind of wild accusations. I mean, not to mention what a horse would do to you if you tried to do that to the horse. But why is it that these people seem to have to go on and on and on and develop more and more and more to these memories, like apparently Yolanda did too? What do you think that's all about?
There are two ways to look at that problem, I think. One way is, does this incremental nature of the story, does that tell us that it isn't true? Are true stories immediately complete and untrue stories sort of develop? I don't think that is the case. I think there's a very good reason for people not to tell the whole story. For instance, if you want to see the perpetrator convicted, then you would probably try to obtain that effect with the minimum story. Because why would you tell it all to other people if, say, the minimum would do? And then if you notice that the minimum story is not good enough for a prosecution, then you have to to tell more and tell more, till finally you bring out the whole story. So that would explain the incremental nature of the story.
Well, in some cases.
In some
yes.
cases. On the other hand, it's also possible that for exactly the same reason, you start with the minimum lie because you want to hurt another person. And if you see that's not going to work, you increase the lie and make it bigger and bigger. So the incremental nature doesn't tell us whether this is a true story or a false story. It cannot be used. Could be either. It cannot be used. The problem, though, is that if a judge believes a story, say, not the beginning story, not the initial story, not the final story, but something in between, how does a judge know that that is the true story, that the initial story is not the true story, and that halfway this is the truth, and then she's going beyond the truth and it's not true anymore? How would a judge do that?
Some of them think they can do that, and it makes me crazy, actually. I mean, someone had the analogy of, would you go into a restaurant, and even if it was your favorite restaurant, even where every single time you went there, you ordered the same beef stew that was your favorite, and you bit into a piece of beef stew this particular night, and it was rotten. I mean, would you shove the rotten ones over here and the good ones over here and just say, I'm only going to eat on this side? No, you'd say, take this stew back. I don't want any of it. But that's not what's going on in these cases. They're doing exactly that.
Je zei tegen mij, want ik ben eerder bij je geweest. 2-3 maanden geleden. Heb ik een hele middag bij jullie zitten praten.
Oh ja.
En toen zei je op een gegeven moment tegen mij, ik zit vaak urenlang te denken. Ik ben nogal een tobber.
Ja. Ja, ook door mijn geheugenverlies natuurlijk, hè. Zit ik te tobben, te denken, wat is dat nou weer? Dat komt ook door mijn geheugenverlies, denk ik.
Maar waar zit je dan aan te denken? Waar top je over?
Alles. Alles. Aan een vriendinnetje uit mijn jeugd, zou ik maar zeggen. Of kennissen.
Ja, bedoel je, dat denk je dan aan of probeer je aan te denken? Of?
Ja, ik denk gewoon aan. Ik denk aan alles, kun je zeggen.
Ja.
Uit mijn geheugen, uit mijn verleden.
Ja.
Ja.
Besef je heel vaak heel goed dat je geheugen niet helemaal meer je dat is?
Ja, tuurlijk weet ik dat wel. Ik vergeet veel dingen, hè.
Ja, ik tutoieer je omdat we dat vorige keer deden, anders misschien wat...
Nee, dat vind ik.
Ja,
dat vind je geen probleem, hè? Ik heet Wim.
Oh ja, Wim. Ja.
Wat zijn dingen die je eigenlijk graag zou willen veranderen in je leven? Ieder mens wil wat veranderen, hè? Het leven is nooit compleet of zo. Wat zijn dingen waar jij graag iets in wilt veranderen?
Nou, ik weet het niet. Ik zou wel in een kasteel willen wonen.
Nou, je bent er een dagje, kun je oefenen?
Ja.
Nee, omdat je de vorige keer toen ik bij je was, zei je tegen me dat je vaak zat te tobben. En ik ontmoet je nou voor de tweede keer en je maakt helemaal niet de indruk van een grote tobber.
Nee.
Meer een denkert.
Ja.
Een denker.
Geen tobben, maar
Ja.
meer denken, ja. Geen tobben.
Ja. Maar dat hangt ook van mijn sfeer af, hè. Als ik soms in een rotbui ben of zo, dan tob ik veel.
Nou, je bent geen tobbetrits.
Maar als ik gewoon gezellig hier zit en zo, en allemaal leuke mensen om me heen, dan top ik niet.
Nee.
Dat is het verschil.
Well, I do agree that if a person is depressed or upset or miserable, that it can completely color what memories get retrieved, what memories get reconstructed, how the past is interpreted, how things get labeled, how a person comes to appreciate what they think is their past. So that is another way in which we have a dangerous situation in these therapy cases, because almost by necessity the people are going into therapy because they're depressed or they're there for a problem. They're not there to tell you how great their life is. So if you're in that particular state, to what extent are you selectively digging through that memory bank, pulling out what pieces, putting them together in what ways with what interpretations, and you construct a more miserable past than maybe you really had.
I have a beautiful example of that, the case I'm dealing with right now. It's a man who has been living with 9 different women in, say, a number of years. I think he cheated one woman with the other in succession. So they all were cheated.
Except the last one? Not
Except
yet.
the last one, but yeah. They, by nature, they are each other's enemies, in principle. But they got together, they found each other and realized we've all been dealt with in the same way.
Mm.
Now they started, guided by a lawyer who helps them to file a lawsuit, starting to remember what happened when they were living with this man. They all come up with the same very negative stories, with even criminal aspects in it, at least. And it's quite understandable that part of that is true, but it's colored by their realization now, we have been had.
Right.
And I think almost of any marriage, if you wanted, you could pick a very negative story of what happened in the marriage. If later on you look back on it with the idea, boy, have I been had. You can always do that. So I think a judge should take into account, see, the reason why all these women now got together and what makes them say whatever they complain about.
En nu, wat wil het geval? Het kruispunt van de beide lanen is er niet eens meer. Geen spoor. Er loopt een snelweg. De lanen zelf zijn verkommerd. Onduidelijk. Is het hem nou of is het hem niet? En dat stemt triest. Het is min of meer een willekeurig gekozen plek en toch zegt dat het een en ander over het verleden. Maar moet dan werkelijk alles bewaard blijven? Zijn dat niet wensen en gevoelens die men slechts in weelderige omstandigheden kan koesteren? De tijd slokt alles op. Het gevecht tegen de tijd is een onzinnig gevecht dat nooit en ten nimmer goed afloopt. Misschien is het daarom zo'n fraai gevecht. Men raakt eraan verslaafd. De tijd is niet te vertrouwen. Er ligt een schreeuw van schrik tussen nu en toen. De tijd is werkelijk niet te vertrouwen. Pas toch op, de tijd verstrijkt. De tijd verwijdert zich.
Elizabeth Loftus verlaat de kelder om zich weer te scharen bij de psychologen Ellen Baddeley en Merlin Donald en de neurowetenschapper Gary Lynch in de dinerzaal met de witte dame aan de muur. Was het trouwens Ben Okri die schreef dat er een enorm verschil is tussen herinneren en herbeleven? Was het Brodsky? Zei Vargas Llosa het? Schreef Armando erover? Ik bedoel, hoe komt het eigenlijk dat je je onaangename of juist gelukzalige situaties herinnert, zonder dat je hartslag opnieuw omhoog gaat of je bloeddruk weer stijgt? Het lijkt alsof het verhaal van die gebeurtenissen in een ander compartiment van ons geheugen is opgeslagen dan de emoties die erbij horen.
I think Elizabeth and I have very little confidence in our memories.
We're very much in common.
I don't have a lot of confidence in my episodic memories. I think I have. This brings up an issue that we were talking about earlier, and that is the role that emotion or emotional tone might play. Because there are certain very vivid experiences that I can almost replay in my head that are 20, 30 years old, but they're almost inevitably periods of high emotion. Right. Or high novelty, which is probably the same thing.
Well, give us an example if you feel comfortable.
That's a very personal thing. How about you give me your example, and I'll give you mine. Well, these are always. I mean, in my experience, they're always personal memories. I'll give you one example. It's fairly neutral.
Okay.
This one I can live with. When I was in college, I had to. I was asked to give the valedictory address, and I was only given about 5 days' notice. I was completely taken aback, and I panicked, and I'd never done anything like this, and my faculty advisor wouldn't give me any advice or any help at all. He said, "You're entirely on your own. I don't want to see you," you know. And I remember the experience. I remember standing in front of a podium and in fact, looking out at an audience and seeing almost nothing but shimmering, you know. I was only aware of the microphone, the podium, and I typed this thing out, and I was aware of the sheet of paper in front of me. And I remember that so vividly. It was an awful long time ago, and it was like it was yesterday. That was over 30 years ago. Now, if you wanted to think about something that's a now print function in your brain that just stamps in a truly episodic memory, this is one that I don't have to recode, you know, in words. This is one that just pops right out. Now I have others, and most people have things like that, and I tend to trust those memories. Although you would probably argue that distortions, even in those memories, could be introduced.
Well, I would not only argue it, I would
demonstrate
present you with all the data on flashbulb memories.
I don't know. I don't have flashbulb memories, but there are one or two incidents where something very emotional did seem to have that effect.
But it is part of. I mean, isn't it really part of this general story that you know, I think you're raising, that emotion plays a very, very large role in how the saliency of memory is.
You know, there's one
beyond that.
interesting thing. I've always enjoyed musical performance. For example, last night I was at Alfred Rendel's performance in the Concerto. It was magnificent, very emotional. I mean, the last piece he played, Les Adieux, was just an incredible performance, and the whole audience gave him a standing ovation, very emotional. Now, I've seen a few performances in my life of that sort, and I remember seeing Itzhak Perlman in London 10 or 12 years ago. It was the same sort of thing. The audience was just totally transformed by the experience. And yet, you would think that those would be really stamped in. And I have found over the years that a number of times I've misidentified the artist or the piece with the time and place and the location and so on, or even who I was with. So you would think that...
We do have more. Our grades do have a great deal more in common.
Yeah,
I guessed earlier.
Flood is coming in.
Yeah, so you would think, you know, if anything got hammered in, that would be it. And yet, the little bits and pieces come apart, and so maybe we shouldn't trust those. I don't know.
You're writing about your father having a revolver. You're hearing him shooting throughout the years. At the same time, you ask yourself in the book, did I ever see the revolver?
I think I never saw this gun, you know. It was something that my father was always talking about, you know, and threatened my mother and myself with this gun. But I don't think I ever saw actually the gun. But one night I heard the gun because we were living we moved all the time, you know, in different neighborhoods in Lima. And for a while, we were living in La Perla, which was at that time a very isolated place, where there were very few houses, and one of the houses was ours. And so we were surrounded by empty, places, and so we were a bit, my mother and myself, quite afraid of being so isolated there. And one night, we heard steps in the ceiling of the house. So my father went out to see, expecting a robber, and apparently a shadow escaped, and he shot the gun, and I heard, and I heard the gun, but I never saw it, No.
Mario, what's the Spanish word for revolver?
Revolver.
Revolver.
Yeah, the same.
And to shoot, well, when he said, well, that I'm going to shoot you, etc., or something like that, what verb he would use? Verb.
Well, I don't.
Was the verb he used, particular?
That I don't know, but I remember that. What I remember is that he was able to threaten us with killing us, with his gun.
You're looking for the thing
but
that activates.
I don't remember the verb. No,
verb. Okay, forget the verb. Well, can I ask you this? The term revolver. It was the term revolver, and not the particular brand, not Smith and Wesson.
No. It was revolver.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't even know what brand.
Not Parabellum, no anything. Yeah?
I don't know.
Okay, now my question is how peculiar the word revolver for the Spanish for the year of for the Spanish language.
I think quite common,
But it's quite revolver. It's not revolvero.
No, it's revolver and it's pistola. We
Pistola.
have two words, pistola or revolver.
Yeah.
But it's probably revolver.
Yeah,
revolver sounds more macho,
more
than
impressive.
pistola. Pistola is a bit soft.
More impressive, more feminine.
Much more impressive. Revolver,
well,
because this mixture of R's and V's, which are strong letters.
That's the whole point.
Why do you ask?
But because when things stick in one's memory, not so much because of the substance, but because of the euphony.
Yes, without any doubt. Yes, without any doubt. Well, but it also the image, the image, the idea of the revolver,
that's the whole point.
That was.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing in Spanish. I believe. Well, that's why all the Latin Americans are so fond of the revolution. Yeah, because it's a word which is slightly out of the context.
We are fascinated with R's, you mean?
Yeah, that's the whole point.
And V's.
With R's and V's.
Revolution.
Nevertheless, traumatic memories are more open to distortion than others.
Yes.
If
I think all
say
memories
to you,
are open
your
to
father
distortion.
didn't have a revolver at all.
No.
It was kind of materialization of your fear.
He had a revolver because, he had a revolver. That was not unusual, in Peru. Many, that was, I wouldn't say totally normal, but many people had guns, had got revolvers, And
Do they, if you do things like the EEG things or polygraph type things or galvanic skin response, things that reflect emotion or responsive to emotion, and is there a psychological study where I would ask you about very painful memories I knew you had in your past and see that you'd have a very strong galvanic skin response, let's say? Whereas if I ask you about a fake memory, you wouldn't.
I'd love to do something like that. I don't think that's it ever. Well, it certainly hasn't been done with any of the really high-tech kinds of things, PET scan sort of technology.
So one has a feeling from the story we heard earlier, when you were reading, you're thinking about your story. If we put you in a room and said, think about this and fill us in all the details, I have a sense that if I was measuring your blood pressure and your blood flow and you're sweating and all the rest of it, that I'd say, this fellow's really having a psychological experience. I wonder if that would be true if we had planted such a memory in his head and he read it back to us.
You remember the voice of your father, the way he is looking, the way he is walking, better than any other person in your childhood.
Without any doubt.
Because it is related to a traumatic event continually.
Absolutely. I retain very small, the details of his face, of his eyes, of his the extreme paleness of his face when he was angry, and this cold voice, which was so penetrant, that could really reach the most secret, I think, corners of my intimacy. I felt completely naked, when I faced him in an attack of rage.
Maybe it was the voice of your language, Mario, rather than your father.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember, because we were so innocent that we didn't say four-letter words, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I remember to say carajo, mierda, this. When I was 7, 8 years old, that was, that's out. And when my father was furious, he used terrible, terrible, dirty words, and this, of course, was another aspect that made me so afraid. These words that were absolutely out of the acceptable language, before for me.
There still is a question, well, maybe traumatic memories might be somehow stored differently in the body and so on, and I want during a break, anytime, to go over.
Well, we're gaining really much better information now, I think, at least on brain subsystems that are encoding various kinds of memories. And
all right.
The work of Joe Ledoux and many others now is making a strong case for certain emotional aspects of memory to have their own special channel into a brain region called the amygdala. And this is a strange piece of work. It is a strange piece of machinery down there. It's not to be offensive, but it's not a proper, decent brain structure by my standards.
Well, is there something about the amygdala that could help us understand how you could take 10 years worth of traumas, for example, and have total amnesia for them and then recover them later?
It's a brain structure that is locked into and itself receives dense projections from lower brain regions, lower brain systems that we know are intimately involved in emotion and state. For example, serotonin, now famous for Prozac, the drug directed is a serotonergic drug. That system has a special and wonderful deep relationship, two-way anatomical relationship with the amygdala. I mean, it's buried within lower brain systems that are controlling arousal, heart rate, feeling. That's why I asked the question earlier. Might it be possible that you could look at some simple, sympathetic kind of signs, such as heart rate, pressure, and this sort of thing, as a marker for amygdaloid involvement? We know that this brain structure, which is intimate in encoding the emotional valence of sensory cues, of information, that this structure has got direct relationships into those parts of the brain that are controlling gastric secretion.
Well, you started by quoting some scientists on the subject of memory, consciousness, brain, this and that, etc., etc., etc. Well, this is a pet objections to some type of scientific inquiry, especially concerning artificial intelligence and this and that, etc. Well, has to do with this, with the indeed isolating the mental activity or the existential activity, so to speak, controlling activity of the human being in the brain. Because I used to think that the entire human body, to say the least, is the brain.
Exactly, that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Descartes fixed consciousness in the pituitary gland, which I think is erroneous, but please carry on.
Well, no, that's basically it. Well, that is, all your system, your entire system is the eye, yeah? Well, full of eyes, so to speak. Well, it's alert. Well, it sends you. It sends signals or receives the signals all the time from the. Nothing could be farther away from brain than, for instance, your food, your soul, yeah, well, and yet it's quite sensitive, yeah, it knows where it's traveling, yeah, so to speak, yeah.
It sees where it's going.
Yeah, it sees where it's going, yeah, yeah.
Well, try to amputate your leg, and it's still there.
And you may have a memory of having a leg,
It's
and
there.
you may even have a pain, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
Now, Gary, I wanted to ask you, when you brought up the amygdala earlier, because well, you might remember that 20 years ago, Marx and Irwin, the neurosurgery combination in Boston, made the proposal that repeat violent offenders should be amygdalectomized. And the evidence is that if you lesion the amygdala, the individual becomes very placid and is very unlikely to get aggressive and so on. Now, for a variety of reasons that I happen to agree with, that isn't normally done. But is it possible that that amygdalectomies, there are two possibilities. One possibility is that an amygdalectomy calms the person because it cuts out if you want, the conditioned emotional responses, the linkage to the cortex of all these subcortical emotional systems. The other one seems to me is more related to what you were saying, and that is that you're not really destroying the responsivity of the system, you're destroying the memories or the possibility of forming associative memories. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think both things are going to happen. In the one sense, you're going to remove, you're interrupting a system that allows the emotional content of the memory to express itself. And in another sense, you're removing the ability of the brain to take what is probably its premier system for attaching an emotional sign to the memory. But even for the past memories, the memories that are already there, it is likely that expression of the emotionality of that memory as you're reliving it is going to funnel through the amygdala. It's simply anatomically. This is not the sort of thing that we have hard psychobiological evidence for, but anatomically, we know that the entire neocortex, the entire sensory systems that are processing the memories and the cue memories and recalling them are funneling down through temporal lobe structures that go to the amygdala, and from the amygdala into areas of the brain that do the heart, the eye, the blood pressure, the sweating, etc., the rest of it. So both in terms of encoding and both in terms of expression of the memories that are already there, the amygdala would seem to be critical.
And some of the old
That's why I was asking the question earlier. Would it be possible we could tease out how emotional this memory really is?
I think it would be very interesting to start by taking a genuine emotional memory and seeing to what extent, by requiring more detail, more sensory detail, more attempting to relive it, one did involve more and more emotion. And then I think having established the phenomenon, then it would be very valuable, I think, to...
You're quite right.
See,
You're
but
quite right.
But
Sure.
even
To
there,
try to
in
tell the difference between the two.
The problem is that even there, in the clinical situation, it still might not discriminate, because by the time the therapist has spent a lot of time possibly constructing, possibly uncovering this memory, the patient's going to have undergone a lot of emotion. So it might still not work forensically, but I think it would be a very interesting line to explore.
Mm-hmm. But I think you're probably right. I mean, in the end, that one can implant not only the contents of memory, or contents of a memory, but as you were saying, you could, with a little practice, get all the appropriate emotionality and all the rest of it put in there as well.
You said moods.
You know, for me, it tends to be mood. I mean, I'd remember this by a certain mood which I can work backwards to what will become visual, what will become this. Mood, because I somehow feel that within mood is contained all the kind of inculate all the sort of seeds of the combination of things that I've sensed. So in other words, it's not just one sense, it's all the senses meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much a mood person, and if I want to remember a place or a period, it's a very strong mood, and that mood.
How do you remember a mood? For me, it's difficult.
Well, okay. A short story I wrote called "Laughter Beneath the Bridge," out of which I described that experience during the war, of which I told you just a tiny little fragment, came out of a mood which I can only describe as being orange in the air. if you can imagine an orange, then the color of the orange, just that in the air.
Being Dutch, you can.
It was just a very strong mood, like that, of orange. And I don't know why, but that haunted me. And I wrote just out of that mood without knowing what the story was. And out of it slowly came this thing. And then it took me 4 or 5 years before I realized what it came out of. And then it took me some more time before I could actually connect the mood to the structure of every single sentence in that story. I had to always keep the mood there. And if I'm going to remember Vargas Llosa, if I'm going to remember Vargas Llosa or Joe Brodsky, it's going to be by particular moods, out of which will come the way he sometimes taps his fingers, or the way he sometimes looks down.
That's what you will remember.
Yeah,
the
but
way he is looking down.
The way he's looking, but it will come back from a certain mood that I have about him, that he gives me. There's no other way I can describe it. This piece of music too affects me in terms of a mood, and places and nightmares and foods.
Also visuality. If you're saying,
everything is in there: visuality, taste, smell, and music.
I've a colleague, Phil Barnard, who makes what I think is a very interesting distinction between two parts of long-term memory. One is concerned with the semantics, if you like, and one is concerned with the implications. And by separating these two, you can have a system that can talk about death and horror and so forth and exchange conversations about this without deeply influencing you, and it's very useful to have that system. The other system seems to be concerned at tying in emotions with semantics and so forth, and I think probably one of the reasons why in trying to treat a patient with depression, it's not enough to rationally convince that patient that they shouldn't feel as wretched as this. You have, in some sense, to get them to learn to re-experience. You've got to get the information through to this implicational system. Now, it seems to me entirely plausible that what will happen is, if you ask me for a memory of some emotional event in my childhood, I might well be able to tell you about it. Oh yes, I got lost in Woolworths that time. Without sort of it really upsetting me, because I'm operating at this propositional semantic level and not at the implicational emotional level.
So when you're telling a story, your heart won't be beating faster.
That's right,
Your heart won't be beating faster and all
So
that.
you won't be able to pick it up with all your fancy physiological measures.
I'm certainly glad I came here. I now know what I have to listen for the next time we have a presidential election where prime ministers running against each other, as they're reinventing my memories for me. And
right,
you do remember when we
Big Brother.
St. Petersburg, your childhood.
What
kind of pictures are coming to your mind?
It's clearly the war, winter, searchlights, planes, the sound of the planes. My mother in little sleds, she drags me through the snow, harrying, presumably to the shelter. That's what I remember. Well, that's the first memory. But it has nothing to do with the sense of danger. Just simply the
There's
first.
not a certain mood you're in at the moment you remember.
Not
Your
really.
heart doesn't start beating faster, for instance.
No, nothing of the sort. No quickening of the pulse. No.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you remember a certain mood you're in, for instance, those corpses in the river, is your heart beating faster, remembering, reliving the past, or not? Because there is a difference. You can remember and you can relive.
I would say I was occupied by it. I'd use the word occupation.
No quickening of the pulse. Well, basically, to me, I think one of the since Ben spoke of the moods, one of the most automatic things that comes with every memory, so much so that you really can't separate that, the two, is the image and the sensation and the sense or mood, if you will, that it doesn't exist anymore. That's sort of elegiac nonsense, yeah. It doesn't exist. Well, no matter what it is. But the sense of, if you will, of loss. Well, not the loss that I bemoan, etc., 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 the loss that I sense. The absence, rather, than the presence. For that matter, for that reason, I suppose, you can be even nostalgic of the war. I can feel nostalgic for the war because it's not there.
Yes, Kundera has a heretical sentence like that, where he talks about, at one point he looked at the picture of Hitler and felt almost nostalgic, almost affection, because it was part of his childhood.
Yeah, well, you are nostalgic actually of yourself, no?
Yeah,
of
course, yes.
Of your youth, of your childhood. And you know, in my case, I think it varies a lot, because some memories come to my consciousness and can be very a very innocuous kind of experience, an experience that doesn't sadden me, nor makes me happy. It's something that is there, you know, and that I can experience in a very detached way. But in other cases, on the contrary, some memories are very painful, very, very painful, and actually reburied, you know, the feelings of sorrow or of hate or of that was attached to the original event, you know, and this is also something that I cannot control. It's something that happens, you know. So there is obviously an unconscious mechanism which reactualize the past in an uncontrollable way.
Ze had het er altijd over en zo, over brand en brand. Ja.
Weet u het nog, mevrouw Nobbe? Mevrouw Nobbe? Weet u het nog van de brand?
Wat is dat?
Weet u het nog van de brand?
Of je nog van de brand weet, van de Wilhelminastraat.
Ja.
Ja? Denkt u er nog wel eens aan?
Nee, nou niet meer hoor. Maar het begin wel hoor.
Toch.
Wat? Toch?
Toch wel?
Ziet u dat ze antwoord geeft op die vraag die ik stel? Dat is een moment eventjes. Ze vangt het wel op.
Ja, want we hebben het over de brand, hè? Mevrouw Nobbe?
Nou, kijk eens naar die meneer. Hij zei, we hebben het over die brand.
Kunt u zich nog herinneren, de brand? In het huis? Mevrouw Nobbe? Weet u dat nog? Ja?
Vanmorgen, toen het nog maar heel licht sneeuwde, heeft Richard Warborough even naar het kasteel gekeken. Nog geen 5 minuten. Door een omgekeerde verrekijker. Slechtziend als hij is, zag hij zo tenminste nog wat. Inmiddels zit hij binnen al uren te tekenen. Onverstoorbaar. Ons geheugen gaat stelselmatig met ons aan de haal. Toch behouden we de illusie dat we één persoon zijn. Mensen uit één stuk. Maar wie zijn we eigenlijk als we dromen? Is de droom de herinnering in zijn pure, ruwe vorm? Niet gekuist door ons bewustzijn overdag. Dromen we om de overbodige herinneringen van de vorige dag op te ruimen? zodat ons geheugen weer wat ruimte krijgt. Zoals de Amerikaan Francis Crick ooit opperde.
There's day residue in our dreams at night, but I don't know that people know what the purpose of dreams really might be.
Yeah, or if they have a purpose. There is this excessive Darwinianism that we all suffer from, in which everything that's there must have a purpose. And when you, I think Stephen Gould and many others like him make an excellent point when they say that's not really the way to look at biological systems. There's great massive things that are very important to us that never really had a reason. They just happen to happen.
But it's not a bad question to start with.
Oh, I agree.
But maybe after a while you should accept the answer, well, maybe it doesn't have a purpose.
Well, and when we come to the case of dreams, we have to be honest, or
yes,
honestly, to confront the fact that we really haven't been very clever in investigating what dreams are about. I always liked Francis Crick's idea, and you've just suddenly helped me with it, because, yes, it would work, of course, if the person was recalling the stuff during the day that wasn't horribly important and then ran this erasure rhythm for 20 seconds, and there goes that, and it helps clean you up for the next day, and you feel a lot better having cleaned out all that. And we'd have to have your editor in there saying, this material we're going to dream about tonight, because it really is a waste. Let's hope it's not this conversation. We're dreaming about this guy. We could test it that way. We could test and see what we dream about tonight. But no, I don't think we've been very clever about what purpose dreams serve.
Well, they don't have much to do with an accurate representation of any part of the past, either recent or distant past, contrary to a common belief by some that they are, telling you what's deeply important to your unconscious. There's absolutely no evidence that dreams are an accurate reflection of the recent or even distant past.
Or are they the guardian angels of sleep, like Freud said, or are they the fulfillment of unconscious sexual desires? No.
Sexual.
I don't know.
May I volunteer for this action? Yeah. Well, I'll be a brave man.
It's all yours.
Yeah, it's thank you.
You don't want anything?
It's all yours. This wide realm of
I don't want to be executioner. Well, I can. Well, since we're talking about memory, I remember I was 23 or 24. And a bunch of my friends, we were discussing indeed subconscious, etc., etc. And simply out of the, well, not exactly because of the spirit of sort of being contrary. And I said what I thought then, and I still think. Well, the same. I claimed that I have no subconscious. They said, well, how can you prove it? I said, very simply. When I dream about, when I have an erotic dream, I do dream about torsos, maximum underwear, but I'm dreaming about the real things and not about birds or elephants. For a moment there was a silence, and then one of the most imaginative in our company said to me, but Joseph, maybe when you are dreaming about the torsos, the underwear, and that sort of thing, you are in fact dreaming about birds. You're in fact thinking about, you're desiring birds.
You mean it has its own language?
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
I think it's a failure of psychology in general that we don't have any common language about what's being dreamed of. What kind of material is being pulled into dreams from memory?
It's also very difficult, I guess, to judge the accuracy of reconstruction of a dream.
Yeah,
that's one of the big problems. But I'm not 100% convinced that they're totally meaningless.
Oh,
because
no, I'm
if
sure that
I have a,
if they're recurring.
And also I think that there's a lot of evidence, anecdotal, I admit, from the psychoanalytic literature that, the old saying that Freudian patients have Freudian dreams and Jungian patients have Jungian dreams. Basically, there are lots of influences that might, from your conscious life, that could be brought to bear, or that seem to be brought to bear in the thematic material of dreams. And
but the day residue gets into the dreams at night, so you're sitting on that,
absolutely.
Freudian couch, and that's
I don't think it needs necessarily to be Freudian. I dreamt last night, in fact. I was wondering, should I wear a tie or not? And I had a dream of myself appearing in a tuxedo and bow tie and feeling very embarrassed. And clearly that was the residue hanging around.
What kind of bow tie was it? Do you
Black.
remember?
Yes, yes.
I guess Gary didn't have that same dream.
I never have. I have no interesting dreams.
No. Well, I very rarely remember them.
I don't believe it. When I was a bachelor in my early 20s, I had a basement apartment in the center of Montreal, which was very dark at night, and for a period of about a year in my life, I actually explored my own dreams. I, on several occasions, had dreams that were very emotional. They were terrifying. And I woke up, and I remember one particular evening, it must have been about 4 in the morning, and the apartment was completely black. It just had a small window, and it was very, very dark at night. And I sat down in a state of terror because it was a terrifying dream. But I had the presence of mind to get up and record it. I still have the record. I think while I was doing that, the clear distinction that I normally have between dream and reality dissolved for a little while. Right. Some people have suggested it's a kind of subset of a strange subset of consciousness. That it's a period when there's some mechanism of memory that's missing that normally would fold this in, and maybe related to what you were saying, that would normally fold this into your linear memory for the day's events. But that other than that, it's a kind of reverie that has a lot of rich content. And sometimes I think it's meaningful, but it's not certainly meaningful in the way most of our thoughts are meaningful.
I think they're interesting semi-dream states that are partly driven by the environment. I can remember an experience of hearing, I have a house by a common that sometimes people go home from the pub, and someone shouting outside, and feeling quite paranoid about this and thinking, here is someone coming specifically to shout these things at me. Or another occasion with a street lamp shining over, in a sort of half-awake, half-dreaming state, feeling that there was some supernatural significance in this.
The best defense of the notion of subconscious in poetry has been offered by an American poet, Delmore Schwartz. There's this line, in dreams begin responsibilities.
Beautiful.
I admire that line enormously until it crossed my mind, rather, that perhaps what he had in mind to say was, in bed begin responsibilities.
There is a kind of body sense, and you see that also when couples start sleeping together, and they work out a kind of geographical arrangement between the two of them in the bed, and yet they're asleep all night. They have no recall of this. But I'm sure if you had a film of the movements, you would find they were very confined, very orderly. That's one kind of awareness. There's body awareness.
Yeah. Who have you been sleeping with?
Same woman for a very long time.
It's not always so orderly.
Oh, really? You fall into bed frequently? I bet you never fall into bed.
No, but people thrash into me.
Yeah. But, you know...
The fellow that read your diary?
Well, I had one, and Elizabeth may want to puncture holes in this memory, but I have one very vivid memory from the period when I was trying to delve into my own dreams, and I did this from a totally non-ideological point of view. I didn't have any theory about this. I was just observing. But one night, when I was recording one of these terrifying dreams, I realized that I had had a dream before, and that when I was starting to have the dream, I was saying, "Oh no, not this one." And when you're a late adolescent, some of these dreams can be pretty terrifying. The memory was apparently dissociated from my normal consciousness because I wasn't aware that I was having these dreams until the last one when I recorded and I said, "Oh, I remembered in the dream that I'd had this dream 3 or 4 times before. I don't know how many times, but now That's interesting. I mean, it almost argues for what you would call state-dependent memory, or a kind of a memory system that was referring within its own self to a chain of experiences, but outside the normal stream of consciousness.
And that's an astonishing idea. We know so little of what actually constitutes a phase that we went through, or a moment that we went through, a moment of tragedy, or a magical moment, or an ordinary moment, the chirping of crickets and the particular fragrance of the wind and the smell of the breezes over cornfields and the way the sky was and all the numerous levels of feelings inside us and a dream unfinished that we carry with us at a particular moment that affects the way we see things, the interpenetrations of desires, memories that actually intercept the moment that we're experiencing now, fragments of books, fragments of images and music, all of these things, all of these different melodies and different aspects and levels of reality, none of which we're completely conscious of, which we live through at any given moment. All of this is a mere fragment of reality. So when we talk of memory, it seems to me that we are already talking like midgets in a vast, mighty mansion that goes all the way halfway to the sky.
Alleen wat niet ophoudt pijn te doen, blijft in de herinnering, schreef Nietzsche. Dat zullen we een volgend maal bezien. Er is tenminste één gast, degene die net zong, die het a priori zal ontkennen. Ondanks alle ellendige herinneringen die hij lijkt te moeten meetorsen. En de anderen hier, die de verschrikkingen ook van binnen en buiten kennen. Auschwitz, de Gulag, de brand in de Wilhelminastraat, de Nigeriaanse burgeroorlog, een doodgewaande vader die plotseling tot leven komt en je jeugd terroriseert. Verwerkt of verdrinkt iedereen dat allemaal op dezelfde manier? We zullen zien. Vandaag rest nog één vraag. Niet waarom verdriet zo goed bewaard lijkt te worden in ons geheugen, maar waarom geluk juist zo slecht lijkt te worden bewaard. Als we het dan toch over de vervalsing van onze herinneringen hebben, dan is dit misschien de ultieme vervalsing.
Did you want to do Mood Indigo? That was interesting.
Yeah. Where's the CD?
Want the CD of it?
Do you remember?
You play it first, and I'll put the CD on. See how much you remember.
Yeah.
good. Shall we just start and do Derek's name? Crackers. Got a tissue, Nanny? Yeah.
It would be interesting to relate, memory to happiness or unhappiness. Because I think when you are happy, if this expression has any meaning, that is when you really enjoy life.
Let's assume it does.
Yeah.
You enjoy life or you're in peace with life?
Oh, well, I think you are happy when you are totally loose in reality. When you lose total consciousness and you really feel submerged by life and, these experiences, which are few, of course, in any human life, but are experiences that in a way compensate for all the rest. I have the impression that don't make much impact in memory. I think memory is not apt, is not able to recollect, to preserve this kind of total integration with the real world. I think memory is much more efficient in preserving unhappiness, wounds, frustrations, aberrations, this kind of episodes that produce, long consequences in your life.
Do you all agree that memory is very good at traumatic events and not being at peace with the world?
It's something that one would like to sort of chew over, especially thinking about the cows you referred to outside coming here.
Yeah.
Yes. Happiness is very difficult to remember. It does tend to become vague. It does tend to, as it were, supervene itself. It does.
And you know why?
Why is this?
Because happiness, as every condition, is by definition a temporary condition.
A very temporary condition.
Yes, I think also it's an invisible condition.
No, it's quite visible, but very often you may not remember the way your flame, your beloved, used to dress. Mm-hmm. You simply don't remember. You don't remember the particulars even of her, dare say, body.
Mm-hmm. You don't remember because when you are happy, you are really abdicating of consciousness.
I wouldn't say abdicating. I would say ascending out of consciousness.
All right. Let's use this
transcendent
optimistic
metaphor. Something rather absolutely
but in any case, your consciousness disappears or is extremely weak when you are really happy in these very exceptional, magical moments.
Mario,
but we have to also accept that some of the most beautiful and some of the most memorable moments in literature are moments of revelation and ecstasy.
Of happiness?
Of happiness of one kind or another.
I don't remember one. I don't remember one page in literature about total happiness.
We could if we try, I think.
But I remember so many episodes about sufferance, about frustration,
but it's not,
about disappointment.
I'm not talking about the numbers of them. I'm talking about the most beautiful and the most powerful moments. I mean, Dante's the harmony that moves.
The stars,
the stars.
The luminaries,
okay,
but that's the last line.
That's the last line, yes.
But there is no human experience there. No. It's a description of
the transfiguration.
An unhuman
the transfiguration.
No,
I think the best.
I'm trying. I'm moving slowly. Slowly. We'll find examples.
But there are no many. You have to look for them. On the other hand, you find all the.
That connects what Brodsky said about the transience of happiness.
Maybe the mystic poetry, but even the mystic poetry, which depicts this.
I'm going to give you examples before this day is out.
Well, I can give you a number of examples right away. But hold a second before we'll get to that. Mario, this is the abdication aspect is a very interesting aspect, and you know why? I think why sort of your consciousness.
Consciousness.
Yeah,
we'll get to conscience later on.
We'll skip the word for the rest of the day.
It takes a walk. It's very simple. I think it's very simple, or fairly simple. I'll try to explain it. Because you see, the entire, and this is what I think we should be talking about, I think, in the final analysis, because the entire system of, entire biological system is geared to one thing, to survival, that is, or to existence, to continuing. Well, therefore, the strongest instinct in us is the instinct of self-preservation, of self-defense. Yeah? At the moment of happiness, we don't have to defend. So therefore, our senses, so to speak, gets a bit sleepy, or get relaxed. Why? Why bother? Now we are not threatened. Beauty doesn't threaten you. Happiness doesn't threaten you.
Oh,
Rilke would
disagree with you there. Yes.
You're not, all right. Rilke would disagree with whatever it is. But in general.
But you must find beauty more threatening than ugliness. I mean, the presence of a beautiful woman, wouldn't it be partially destroyed?
No, I'd rather have the beautiful woman than
the ugly experience. You'd rather be destroyed by beauty than by ugliness.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Because what?
Do you remember the melody now?
Yeah.
Can you sing it?
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. You remember?
Yeah.
Or is it a difficult piece to remember?
It's a difficult piece for me.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, listen to the chord. There it goes. You do that. Well done, the best chord.
What I was trying to say is that happiness is not a very fertile raw material for literature. I think happiness is wonderful, and that's what we would like to have.
I've got a moment for you.
Yeah.
I have a moment for you.
Okay,
it's one of the most beautiful blending moments where these two things are so perfectly balanced as to raise happiness to an nth degree while containing it within a keyhole. It's that fantastic moment in Chartreuse. When Fabrizio, Chartreuse.
Which moment?
When Fabrizio is looking out through the cell.
Well, that's why the entire novel is written. I think.
Right.
Yeah. For that scene.
Just for that moment.
When he gets when he gets locked up in his cell and he looks through the hole. And he's
and sees his beloved.
Yeah.
But sees it from such an angle of restriction and from such.
Cleda Conte was her name, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That the joy itself is multiplied, and that's one of the most memorable. I mean, everybody talks. That's one of the most memorable scenes in French literature. One of the most memorable. But then you notice it's made particularly sublime because of the conjunction of being in prison and the loved one, and having that little space in between. So it's just a perfect balance between your preservation and your happiness as forgetfulness.
No, he simply targets his object of his desire.
Yes.
It's a target.
Maybe it's the way in which our memory also recollects this.
But let me counter Ben. Yeah.
Oh, good. I was about to do that myself.
We have to talk about two things. Well, there is a happiness of the writer who writes this scene, and there's the happiness of the reader who reads this scene. Yeah. Well, and or happiness of the character.
But the happiness of the writer may be the unhappiness of the characters.
Well,
what's usually the case.
Yeah. Well, and happiness of the reader is both. Yeah, very often. Yeah. Well, to me, the scene that made me, since you mentioned Divine Comedy, well, the greatest scene that I think I know in literature Well, there are so many, but the great sin is the meeting between Dante, Virgil, and the Roman poet Statius. Well, it's in Purgatorio. Well, they bump into that old man. You remember the conceit. Well, they bump into somebody and they ask who he is, etc. And so Dante and Virgil bump into this man, and he says, "My name is Statius, and my only claim to fame, so to speak, well, in significance, that I lived in Italy at the same time, under the same sky, breathed the same air as Virgil did." And Dante can't help smiling at this remark, simply because Virgil stands next to him. He looks at Virgil, Virgil says, "Don't say a word," yeah. So he smiles, and Statius gets terribly angry. He said, "Why are you smiling, son of a bitch? What's so funny?" Yeah.
This means a lot to me.
Yeah, this means a lot to me. Well, he looks again to Dante looks again at Virgil, Virgil says, "Don't say." Well, so for a while it continues. Then Statius gets angry and angry, and then Dante turns to Virgil, and Virgil says, "Okay, go ahead, break it to him." And he says, "I'm smiling simply because the man whom you love so much and of whom you spoke so highly, well, stands next to me. That's him. That's Virgil." At these words, Statius falls on his knees and kisses Virgil's sandal. And Virgil gets absolutely infuriated. He said, "What are you doing? You're out of your mind, whatever it is." What are you doing? Kissing the sandal of the shadow. I'm a shadow, yeah. Well, and Statius, still on his knees, lifts his eyes, filled with tears, and he says, "Imagine then how much I loved you in that world, that in this, in Purgatorio, I take your shadow for the flesh."
Here's the introduction. Ready? One. You play as well.